The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 421, Getting Started. Despite its horrendous taste, Lex downed the coffee, for he needed the mental clarity it would bring. After all, this was not normal coffee but the midnight special coffee brew, and had the effect of providing the drinker with 1 hour of mental clarity. Of course, that was just a blanket statement, and effects would vary depending on circumstances. In the case of Lex, it barely provided him with an extra 10 minutes at most. Keeping that in mind, Lex directly delved into matters. He had a list of system notifications waiting for him, but they could wait. First on Lex's priority list was healing Harry, so he teleported to X-142 once again and entered the Infinity Emporium. Powell Grant greeted him once again with a big smile, but Lex had no time. "Show me the strongest soul-healing medicine you have," said Lex. "It should also be extremely gentle, so that it can be used on even weak people." Powell, as a great salesman, immediately noticed that Lex was not in the mood for the usual banter that they enjoyed, and so immediately showed him the list. Lex was a rank 9 member of the Emporium, and though the items on sale were of all ranks, Lex didn't even bother looking below rank 7. At such a high rank, there were only a handful of medicines, or items with healing effects, though Lex didn't care. With an impassive face, Lex said, "I'll buy them all." Powell, who by now practically worshipped Lex as his best and favorite guest, once again broke out in a massive smile. "Excellent choice. It will take a few days to procure all the items, but no more than a week at most. How do you intend to pay?" With valuable information, Lex replied hurriedly. At this moment, there was another consideration that Lex had to take into account. He did not believe that there was ever a possibility of anyone tying him to the inn, and especially to the identity of the innkeeper. After all, who could track his movement across the universe? But Lex had had enough of believing in probability and luck, and decided to prepare contingencies. He had already sold a few pieces of information to Powell that should have been way beyond his level, not to mention the business card which was a matter related to downlords. Keeping this in mind, he knew that were anyone paying attention to him, for example the Emporium itself, he had to provide a reasonable explanation to source everything he knew and had, and let people arrive at the conclusion he wanted. Thus, he decided that in case it became inevitable that someone should track him to the inn, he would make use of his other identity at the inn, Leo, the owner of Gamers Denver. For that, moving forward, he could only use information which was possible for someone of his level to have. Moreover, Leo himself also needed to become more active at the inn, so that people actually knew about him. But keeping up that persona would cause him to lose the availability of a lot of information and items. So, while selling sensitive information, such as the identity of the owner of the person who launched the attack that shook the realm, would give him a lot of profit, he had to maintain the mentality of an employee. And an employee would never purposefully reveal details about the innkeeper, so Lex must also never do the same. But then, at the same time, he could use common information from the inn and sell that. After all, so long as the Emporium didn't gain direct access to the inn, they would have to rely on him for information. When Powell led Lex into the appraisal room, Lex wasted no time and first informed him that there was a hotel in the universe offering special environments to cater to divine guests. That's about all he said, for he was still trying to gauge the level of this information, and would depend on Powell's reaction to understand how much it was worth. His strategy paid off really well, for the man really had no concept of a poker face, and stumbled so hard he nearly fell from his chair. "What's the name of the hotel?" he asked, with a feverish energy. This information to ordinary people meant nothing, but to the right people, was worth a lot. Yet Lex did not answer and maintained his emotionless expression. "How much is this information worth?" he asked, without expressing if he would divulge more or not. Powell quickly regained his composure and began negotiating with Lex, but no matter what he did, Lex never directly gave the name of the hotel. Instead, he traded other bits and pieces of information until he had sufficient information to pay for what he wanted to buy, such as the news that a group of pillagers led by a Quash leader called Nzar had been destroyed, the Devils had lost a star system to the advance of the Jotun Empire, the Iron Heart pirates had changed their profession and had become marketing managers, etc. All the information Lex sold was worth nothing to him, but he knew how much it could be worth to those with vested interests. Finding those people would be the Emporium's job. Lex only cared that 1 week later he would have what he needed to heal Harry. As soon as he was done, Lex left. It was only after his departure that Powell realized they had spent only 4 minutes during the entire exchange. His casual smile and cavalier attitude quickly changed as he elevated Lex's status even more in his mind. Something was different about Lex, and whatever it was, it made him seem more intimidating. Powell did not want to be the person who would stand in his way. With his conscience cleared, Lex focused on the next matters. He only had a few dozen more minutes maximum before he fainted again, so he would make the most of them. He skimmed through his system notifications. There were way too many to read in depth at the moment, and got the gist of the matter. He had actually lost 2 points of authority because of the chaos that had been caused at the inn, and the number of his guests who were affected. He also received a bunch of emergency quests to save the inn, save his workers, save his guests, save his reputation. Most of them he succeeded, but some of them he failed. Due to the valiant effort of his workers, none of the guests were actually killed, so the system's punishments were not too severe. Yet no matter how bad his punishment had been, he had completed quite a few quests when he killed all the enemies. Moreover, as a result of his attack on the entire realm, as well as his act of making a demonstration of his enemies and burning their souls, the reputation of the inn had been elevated so much that he regained the 2 points of authority he lost, and in fact even gained 2 more, alongside a few other rewards. Lex did not have the time to go through them in excruciating detail, so once he confirmed that he had no impending urgent quest, he turned his attention to the rules of the inn. There were aspects of the system he still could not control yet, such as the appearance of the golden doors randomly, yet in other areas he had great control. Though the inn itself was generally open for all, Lex began designing special zones that would be limited to only those with a high enough cultivation. He could not force people of different cultivations to stay away from one another, but by creating exclusive zones for each cultivation range, he would automatically entice his guests to divide themselves. While this was not a perfect solution, his goal was to reduce the number of weak and strong cultivators mingling, so that if anything ever went wrong, the amount of collateral damage would be reduced to a minimum. Also, while it was not a perfect solution, until he got something figured out, he would have to continue relying on external security. As such, he began planning a long-term event that would allow him to keep sufficient guards around for a long time. He also had to allocate a sufficient budget. As for what the event was, he had the perfect idea. After all, the event itself didn't matter to Lex as much as the duration and security of it. He was just using another loophole in the system. How was he supposed to know that the lame event that he was planning would set off a storm, and kick off a new hobby for all the secluded cultivators of the Origin realm? He anticipated that it would take him only a few successful deals through the guild room before he had enough MP to pay for security. Then he would begin his next plans. In the last minute before he fell back asleep, he scanned the inn one more time to check if he missed something, and found something interesting. Aegis had finally come to the inn to investigate, and alongside him was Roland, the young entrepreneur. More importantly, in the new live map function he had unlocked recently, Roland was colored yellow, meaning he was an excellent candidate for an employee. Chapter 422 Manipulation. The live map function was yet again another new function that Lex had recently gained. Its uses were many and Lex had planned to use it to its maximum capabilities, but he had been too swamped with one event after another to pay any attention to it. Even now, the only reason he paid attention to it was due to the fact that he was focused on Aegis and Roland to begin with. Lex was curious why the map colored Roland, the young entrepreneur who sold newspapers with a gang of kids, yellow as a prospective employee rather than Aegis. But he did not have time to ponder. He felt that he would fall asleep at any moment, so he made his move. As an immortal, Aegis was able to sense many more things than cultivators below his level. Even among immortals, he barely met anyone who was as talented as himself, not to mention skilled. Therefore, the moment he arrived at the Midnight Inn, he instantly knew that Lex had not lied to him. This place, it really was a different realm than his own. He did not need to detect the subtle flavor that spiritual energy had, which was different from his own, nor the concentration, or any number of other things. Just the fact that the subtle pressure preventing him from reaching a higher realm had disappeared was enough. Back in the crystal realm, anyone who reached the realm of Earth Immortal would be able to sense it. Growing one's cultivation realm after reaching the Earth Immortal realm was not only incredibly difficult because of the high realm level alone. The realm itself put some kind of pressure on all immortals, slowing their growth. But sometimes, either through odd circumstances, or through ridiculous talent, there were a few who reached the peak of the Earth Immortal realm, and even managed to surpass it. When that happened, they would get ejected from the Earth realm forcibly. This was an incredibly rare occasion to begin with, which is why the knowledge that the Earth Immortal realm was not the end of cultivation was already firmly in the realm of hearsay, in the crystal realm at least. As for what happened after they reached that realm, and were ejected, was the subject of endless speculation amongst the few who were in the know. Due to his position, Aegis knew one of the rumors suspected to be the truth, which was that once someone surpassed the Earth Immortal realm, they were sent to another realm called the Ascension realm. But again, the concept of realms was too vague for him to understand completely. Yet now, here he was, at the Midnight Inn in another realm. Moreover, he had even brought along the small kid from the tavern along with him. What was the name of this realm? Could it be owned by this inn? Would that make it the Midnight Realm? He was lost in his thoughts as he looked around to take in the sights, when someone suddenly teleported in front of him. The man was dressed exceptionally well, and the aura he projected was one of great power and authority. Aegis got the same feeling from his father, but for some reason, he had a feeling that even his father could not match up to him. Moreover, the man was radiating an aura of the deeper laws that was so intense, it almost caused him to have to close his eyes. Unbeknownst to him, this was the aura from the hallucinations that his body had begun to absorb. Since Aegis would not be harmed by the aura, the system did not filter it out, but since Roland would not be able to handle it, the system employed its usual protective feature to protect him from suffering due to the aura. A few thoughts ran through Aegis' mind as he quickly surmised who this might be, and had only just thought of how to react when the innkeeper would ask him about joining, when the man looked directly past him and at Roland. "Dear guest, allow me to introduce myself. I am the innkeeper, the owner of this humble establishment. I hope you enjoy your stay at my inn, and make the most of our numerous services. If you find the inn agreeable, and think that you may want to pursue a future alongside us, then please make use of this key. It will allow you to take a simple trial, and if you are able to pass, you will have the honor of joining the Midnight family. Your skills and excellent attitude will be greatly appreciated here at the Midnight Inn." Roland, who grabbed the key from the innkeeper's hand, was looking up at the man with his mouth hung open. He was not expecting to receive a job offer, especially for a place as incredible as this. While Aegis was still able to calmly take in everything the inn had to offer, Roland, as a young man, was much more impressionable. But, at this moment, more shocked than Roland was Aegis. He was the one who came to the inn to check out if he wanted to work here, but he had been completely ignored in favor of a small kid. "Innkeeper, it is an honor to meet you, my name is," began Aegis when he noticed Roland was too shocked to reply, but was interrupted by the innkeeper. "Are you wondering why I am offering the kid a job while ignoring you?" The innkeeper, who had been smiling warmly at Roland, looked at Aegis with an uninterested and bland look. "It's very simple. The kid is exceptionally talented and motivated, making the most of every situation. He also put on an excellent display of not losing himself to despair when all hope seemed to be lost, never forgetting to keep the calm for his followers. You, on the other hand, are an overgrown child with daddy issues and a penchant for throwing tantrums. You're so oblivious to everything that isn't about yourself, you do not even see what is truly happening in your own world. I will not retract the opportunity you have received, but consider for a moment if you can provide anything other than your strength. And if it's a matter of strength, I have no shortage of people to choose from." Lex may have sounded harsh, but he understood Aegis well enough now that he knew if he paid him too much information, or gave him too much favor, he would fall into the same category of everyone who worshipped him for his talent all his life. Instead, by challenging him and belittling his existence to nothing more than hired muscle, he challenged Aegis to prove him wrong. It may seem a little cold-hearted to manipulate someone so directly like that, and think so little of them, but with his hallucinations returning, Lex could not be his kind and warm-hearted self. He was barely keeping his sanity, he could not distract himself with thoughts like empathy. In fact, before Aegis had a chance to respond, the Innkeeper disappeared. In truth, he had returned to his recovery pod, but to Aegis, it seemed like the Innkeeper truly thought too little of him. In truth, Aegis felt offended by how he had been so directly belittled, but at the same time, he was shocked by the man's aura, as well as how easily he had been able to read Aegis' thoughts. He also felt a strong inclination to prove the man wrong. Despite becoming an immortal, he could do nothing about the fact that at the end of the day he was human, and human emotions were easily manipulated. Had this been anywhere else, Aegis would not have been so easily fooled. He was still an immortal after all. Unfortunately, how could he challenge Lex, right in the Midnight Inn? None of his senses worked properly on him. The two of them spent a couple of days at the inn, taking in everything the inn had to offer. Amazed by the magical land, Roland was unable to stop himself from crushing the platinum key and starting his trial. Besides, he had nothing left for himself at the Crystal Realm anyway. Aegis, on the other hand, returned to the Crystal Realm. Whether he accepted the job or not, he would prove that he was not worthless by having Zagan use the platinum key. But at the same time, the Innkeeper's remark about how he was oblivious to the truth of his own world struck him hard. He was not stupid, he knew his father was keeping secrets from him, he just never cared. But what if it was not just his father, but all the races? He recalled that Lex had also asked him some questions relating to the Craven. He never cared before, but he had to prove to himself that he wasn't worthless. If he was ignorant before, it was because he didn't care, but now that he cared, he would definitely find out. Unbeknownst to him, even this action of his was playing right into Lex's hands. Chapter 423, Lonely at the Top. Lex had once again fallen asleep, and this time, the Lotus was having a little more trouble helping him lay the necessary foundation for his body. The Lotus itself was an infant, after all, and the more it raised Lex's foundation, the harder it became to further improve it. Last time it had to ask the turtle for some extremely fertile soil, while this time the Lotus used up all the divine essence that had been collected by the divine boulder core, the core being the small pebble that Lex had found back in the crystal realm that greatly increased his strength. Lex always assumed that the essence could no longer assist him, but the essence was literally something used by divine beings. How could it be so straightforward? The reason why Lex could no longer gain benefits from it was that he had tempered all his skin with it, strengthening it while also making it non-permeable to the essence. The reason for that was to prevent any essence inside his body from leaking out. Ergo, the next natural step was to have the inside of his body washed in the essence. Lex was naturally incapable of doing that, since at most he could drink it. The Lotus, however, could wash every inch of Lex's body, not only strengthening his foundation, but also increasing the strength of his body. The gist of it was taking a lot longer to help Lex wake up this time compared to the last couple of times. The physical universe, or rather the physical origin realm, was a vast and wonderful place. The possibilities were endless, and it was filled with strange and mesmerizing visages. Yet only the lucky or the worthy ever had a chance to bear witness to it. Fortunately, there was another place where even the mundane could experience the full glory of everything the physical plane had to offer. This mystical place was known as the Henali Portal. All one needed to do was scan their body and then use any of the VR immersion devices to enter the portal with their mind, and live in the alternate reality, which was the Henali Portal. The size of the portal was incalculable, for no one had ever discovered the borders of this place. Unlike the physical place, which existed as planets, star systems, and galaxies, the portal existed only as one continuous plane. Each galaxy that was connected to the Henali portal would receive a plot of land proportional to the size of their galaxy, where they would hold their sovereignty. If the galaxy had an owner, for example, the Jotun Empire, then anyone entering the virtual plot of land would require an online visa. The visa thing sucked, but that was veering off into the political side of the portal. Basically, the portal was massive, and in fact, the definition of the known universe that was commonly used in the origin realm referred to the area of the realm which had been connected by the portal. Other races could only explore how vast the origin realm was by the number of connected galaxies. Besides them, only the Henali truly knew how expansive the origin realm was, but they could not be bothered to lay out the portal themselves, so they had members of the Alliance doing it. Predictably, one of the most popular forms of entertainment in the portal was fighting. Since the fighters would not really die in real life, many people used the ultra-realism of the portal to hone their skills and contest against strong opponents. In one such place, in an unnamed galaxy, in a private room, a Marzu, also known as T-Rex, a Bun-Air, a race of sentient beetles, and an Olan, a humanoid race with bronze-colored skin and majestic antlers, were sitting together. All three females were spectating a battle royale and casually chatting amongst one another. This, for them, was a very common get-together. Though it may seem like they were rich and carefree, in truth, they were all battle maniacs who happened to become friends from battling one another in the portal. Every so often, they would take a break and rest like this, for maintaining peak mental state required some off time. The Ulan, a young girl of only 91 years of age, was casually sifting through the pages of an online battle magazine when a particular article caught her interest. To be more specific, it was the image above the article that caused her interest. It was the silhouette of a man dressed smartly, holding naught but a butter knife. The lands before him were filled with bodies of what she could only assume were his defeated opponents, though the outline of his face did not seem to be looking down at them. Instead, it was looking upwards, as if challenging the heavens. Though it was only a picture, and the young girl could not even determine the warrior's expression, let alone his identity, something about the way he stood filled her heart with admiration, as well as worship. The title of the article was "To Die at His Hands is the Ultimate Mercy" and was written by a Rachel. The Ulan girl could not move her gaze away from the heroic figure in the picture, as if his silhouette contained everything she had ever dreamed of. Unbeknownst to herself, the bronze-skinned girl began to blush. At this point, her two friends noticed something was going on, but she herself did not notice. She finally pried her eyes from the picture, and began to read the words written below. "How lonely is it at the top?" the author asked in her first sentence, and then continued. "It is a question we will never be able to answer, for that is the place where he stands, alone, protecting everything he holds dear. But while he stands at the front to protect so many others, why must he stand alone, with no one to protect his heart?" The Ulan girl did not even realize when the tears started flowing down her cheeks as she imagined a hero, going from one battlefield to another, his body a canvas for battle scars. But when he returns at night to rest by his campfire, he rests alone. "I will protect your heart," the girl wanted to scream, but she knew her voice would not reach the hero's ears, for he was surely far away, fighting to keep the universe safe. At the end of the article, a part she had not yet reached, was a statement by the author, mentioning an upcoming comic series depicting the exploits of the noble hero known only as the Innkeeper. Chapter 424 First Meeting. 6 days after Lex returned to his recovery pod, he finally woke up again. This time his condition was much better, and he even felt like he could manage to ignore the hallucinations without any assistance. Moreover, his body was overflowing with strength, yet at the same time, he felt completely normal. It was an unusual feeling, but he did not have the time to delve into these matters. He had to make the most of his time before he fell asleep again. It was also because of his rush that he missed the formation of the Innkeeper fan club that was holding its first ever meeting, having been formed after the small news article and comic strip that Velma launched on the Midnight newsletter as well as the Henali portal. He teleported to his office, once again finding Luther standing there, coffee in hand. Yet this time, he was also holding 3 folders. Lex raised an eyebrow out of curiosity, but chugged his coffee before asking what they were about. "Do you have something that requires my attention?" Lex asked, turning towards Luther. It was only natural that with time, Luther would bring various matters to Lex's attention. After all, as Lex's assistant, his job did not end with sending in people to Lex's office for meetings. Though Lex was feeling much better, and could almost ignore the hallucinations, the fact of the matter was that the effects they were having on him were much deeper than just putting him in a coma. They messed with his emotions, so that even now, Lex was more or less in his neutral and cold state. Luther, having only glimpsed at the usual warm and friendly innkeeper, felt the innkeeper's current attitude was a reflection of everyone's poor performance. "There are a couple of proposals I had which I wanted to bring to show you. After spending some time at the inn, and talking to a lot of the workers, I believe that we, the workers, are not sufficiently motivated or driven to give our best performance. After a detailed investigation into how all the workers actually perform, I came up with a list of possible solutions to increase motivation and drive up work efficiency. I also mentioned a special training program which can focus on a few workers who have proven their worth to aid in increasing their cultivation, so that they can be of greater use to the inn." With his interest piqued, Lex reached out and grabbed the first folder and read through the list. Despite how minimal Luther actually made it sound, he had been incredibly thorough in his report. Each proposed change was supported with an in-depth explanation for where he saw the shortcoming, and how he suspected the change could increase efficiency. Even with Lex's increased cultivation, as well as heightened efficiency due to the overdrive state, it took him nearly an entire minute to read through it. What impressed him most was that Luther hadn't taken it upon himself to make judgments, but had actually talked to a lot of the workers to determine whether these mentioned improvements would actually bring about positive change in their relevant departments. A brief example of the kinds of proposed changes would be performance-based raises and promotions, result-based perks, such as access to some of the inn services or extra holidays, an annual review of the best workers in each department, specific events or holidays focused towards the workers, etc. Furthermore, it suggested sending the workers who performed the best to a neutral cultivation institution, called Ventura, to aid them in raising their cultivation. Lex had to say, if Luther ever got a corporate job back on Earth, he'd be possibly one of the most beloved employees ever. In his cold and calculating state, Lex almost immediately approved the changes. But no matter how cold or emotionless he became, it did not erase his memories. One of the strongest feelings Lex had back when he learned that his workers were actual living people instead of autonomous robots, was that he did not want to treat them like slaves or mindless workers. Moreover, no matter how much he could possibly improve efficiency by doing these things, he could never overlook the loyalty his workers had shown him. So, while Luther presented a lot of good ideas, Lex could not implement them as if. Before he made a comment, though, he summoned two other workers to his room, Gerard and Velma. He had noticed that those two had contributed the most in this proposal and so wanted to include them in this talk. Naturally, due to the limited time that Lex had, he did not wait for them to come to him themselves, but informed them to finish whatever they were doing, and then teleported them over directly. The moment that the others entered his office, a change took place and a conference table appeared with 4 chairs. It seemed like they were about to hold the first ever meeting to discuss improvements at the inn. "This is a good proposal," Lex began, "and I like the initiative of locating areas that need improvements and suggesting them on your own. But while these are good ideas, they need some alterations before we can implement them. While getting the workers to improve efficiency is good and all, I do not want the whole purpose of their existence to become working and serving. As such, while we will create avenues for those who wish it to improve, as well as take on more responsibility, there's not going to be discrimination for those who are satisfied with their place. All added perks and services will not be limited to certain people only. After all the workers at the Midnight Inn are a family, and as a family, we do not discriminate, but look out for one another." There was an imperceptible pause when Lex reached this point as thoughts of his family keeping secrets from him flashed in his mind, but Lex moved past it. Luther had presented some good ideas here, and Lex wanted to start on them immediately after they went through some changes, of course. Occasionally missing content, please report errors in time. Chapter 425, Last Two Folders. Although went through the dramatic claim of having the first ever meeting to improve the inn between Lex and key members of the inn, the actual meeting lasted no more than 3 minutes. The whole premise of Luther's proposal was to have the workers improve themselves by creating a competitive environment, so that only those who had the will and dedication could rise through the ranks and get the respective rewards. While in theory this was a good thing, Lex knew for a fact that such an environment hardly ever only promoted healthy competition. The only change Lex made to this, since he also didn't believe in just giving handouts, was that he did not set a limit to perks and services. Should any of the workers want higher pay, different positions, more holidays, or anything along those lines, there was a way for them to pursue it. Luther instead had limited quotas per annum for certain raises and services, which would have bolstered competition. Regardless, after making a few changes, Lex directly implemented them and informed Mary of them as well, since technically she oversaw more of the inn's activities than his actual workers. He was looking forward to the day he could give her an actual physical body so she could also join the inn and actually spend time with everyone. All Mary had told him, for now, was that once his authority was high enough, he would gain that option eventually. Once that was concluded, Lex turned to the matter of sending his workers outside the inn to train. Once his authority was high enough to teleport people outside the inn wherever he wished, he could do this, since his workers weren't actually limited to only existing in the inn space. Still, even if he could do this right now, he still wouldn't. There are some things you can't anticipate right now due to your level as well as your exposure, the innkeeper said, looking at Luther. He could tell that, by far, he was the most ambitious of his workers. But his experience was, ultimately, limited to the inn and the information he was born with. While on the surface it seems like a good idea to send workers out to raise their cultivation, and this Ventura organization may have a reputation of being neutral, there are some things you do hoping to rely on the mercy of others. All the workers, even the seemingly ordinary ones, have an ordinary talent and very powerful bloodlines they can unlock. Once or twice might be fine, but once workers start going to an external organization and they notice the trend of so many people with the exact same bloodline, it may eventually give birth to greed in their hearts. So, the workers can only train at the inn. While this is slow for now, eventually, the inn will continue to improve, and the training you receive will be no less than any other establishment. Forgive me for being impatient, Luther said, bowing. He suddenly felt ashamed for planning so many things on his own without gaining the innkeeper's approval first. The innkeeper clearly had a keener insight into the machinations of the universe than himself, so relying on him would not lead him astray. Fortunately, the innkeeper had not punished him, but instead guided him on which direction to focus future suggestions. "What are the other folders?" Lex asked. Luther promptly handed Lex the next one, which detailed his suggestions for things to add to the inn, as well as a few proposed changes to the security protocols. These Lex read a bit more thoroughly, for the idea of creating a prison, or dungeon, and then holding those who transgressed was extremely serious. It felt like a huge decision. And yet, it was not, for he had been doing it for a while already. In his emotionless state, there was no room for false modesty. It was a simple truth that the inn was his home, and that while he would be warm and friendly to most, to those who meant him harm Lex should not be lenient. The inclination to not harm someone, or at least not be so harsh, was something nurtured by living in civilized society, where freedom and safety were the foundations of civilization. But while all countries touted the call of human rights and peace, one needs but to open a history book to remember the foundation for a nation where these ideals could be peddled was built through war. But at the same time, there was no need to be so ostentatious while doing these things. Lex approved them, but did not immediately implement them. This was simply because he did not have the MP to spare at the moment. He asked for the last folder, but was surprised when he saw Luther's awkward appearance. Hesitantly, the assistant handed Lex the final folder. This one was thin. In fact, it was only a single page. It was a proposal for funeral proceedings for the workers that died. Lex's host attire made it so that Lex had absolute control over all his actions, small or big. So it was a conscious decision when Lex let out a sigh and sat down on his chair. Without making a single change to the existing plans, Lex made a single addition and approved it. This proposal was not from Luther, but a joint suggestion from all the workers. They did not wish to be buried at the inn, for this was the place they cherished with all their heart. They did not want a cemetery in this place. Instead, those chose, for their fallen brothers and sisters, as well as for themselves should they die, to be cremated, and have their ashes spread across the inn. The only addition Lex made was a monument, simple and unassuming, found in a lost corner somewhere in the inn, with the names of the workers who passed, and a little about them. Suddenly, Lex felt a strange exhaustion grip his body. Then he made a decision. Occasionally missing content, please report errors in time. Chapter 426, The Long, Lost Leo. Lex had been extremely focused on taking care of the inn as much as he possibly could in the few moments of lucidity he had every time he woke up. But he had other plans as well, which were just as important. One of them was bringing Leo, the owner of the gamer's den, back. After all, if anyone ever guessed that Lex worked at the inn, he would use Leo to explain that identity. Now was a good time to make his comeback, and he intended to come back in spectacular fashion. He scanned the inn once and instantly picked on something interesting. After learning the details surrounding what was happening, Lex couldn't help but be amazed. Sometimes, things just aligned up too perfectly. He teleported away. I told you for the last time, I can't fight any nascent realm cultivators, said Z in an exasperated tone. It had been days since he last watched any decent anime. It was work this, responsibility that. After all that had happened, he hadn't even had any time to rest. As if that wasn't enough, some of the regulars at the battle arena started to come and bug him. Z had quite the reputation, and fought many battles. But while he had a near-perfect win streak, it was within limits. He could not fight nascent soul cultivators, as he could barely fight against golden core cultivators if he used all his strength and bloodline abilities. Yet those regulars did not seem to care, as they kept trying to convince him. After all, it was just a little gambling. The good thing about the inn was that the fights weren't to the death, unless stated in the beginning, so there was no farm. The recovery pod had been good enough to heal all combat wounds so far. Think of it as training. Come on chap, if you only ever fight easy opponents, how will you ever grow? Even defeat can teach a valuable lesson. If you think it's easy, you fight them, said Z one more time. Though they were annoyingly persistent, at least they weren't insulting or blackmailing him into fighting, which is why he kept tolerating them. Otherwise, all he needed to do was tell old man Gerard they were bothering him and they would be taken care of. Security had been very strict about safety lately. Come now, don't be like that. Just one fight. Think about how impressive you'll look in front of all the ladies. Z sighed and was about to respond again, when he heard a voice that he hadn't heard in a long, long time. Stop bothering my cute little employee. If you want someone to fight, I'll do it. Z and the men begging him to fight all looked over to see Leo. He was dressed very casually, in a black t-shirt and blue jeans, and the expression he wore was that of a smug smile. Since he was wearing Clark Kent glasses he was in disguise, but it only changed his appearance without changing too many details. Yet, despite how ordinary he seemed, for some reason, the feeling Z got was not casual whatsoever. Instead, he felt that right now, Leo was very, very dangerous. The system was suppressing the aura of his laws, since no one here was an immortal and could not tolerate it without getting hurt, but the natural intimidation carried by Lex's body was allowed to flow freely. He looked athletic, but his body was not bulging with muscles like that of bodybuilders or, in some cases, body cultivators. Yet that did not mean that the strength of his body was not completely overwhelming. Lex released his Foundation Realm aura to show them that he wasn't too strong either. Since he scanned the inn, he knew that there was a group of gamblers who had gathered together to try and get Z to fight a nascent realm fighter. They didn't have malicious intentions, or else the system would detect it. They were just ordinary gamblers who had been blinded by Z's endless victories, and wanted to bet big. After all, they had yet to see him fail so far, so they believed he was capable of anything. Lex decided to make use of the crowd's attention to declare his return. "Who are you?" one of the gamblers asked. Unlike Z, who was honed in battle, they did not pick up on Leo's dangerous aura at all. "Leo, I'm Z's boss, and..." He disappeared from right in front of them and reappeared in the arena. All the screens in the arena, as well as everywhere else in the village, turned to show Leo standing in the arena alone, his aura on full blast. "I'll accept as many challengers as you want, nascent realm and below. You can come at me together, but you only have 60 seconds, as I'll stop accepting challengers after that. I'll personally put up a pot of 50,000 MP. Anyone who beats me can get it." There was an immediate ruckus, as the gamblers who had surrounded Z ran to enter the arena and place their bets. Even Z could not help but make his way to the arena. After all, someone would be needed to carry his irresponsible boss' unconscious body after the fight. 60 seconds was not a lot of time, yet the incentive of 50,000 MP was enough to cause people to run, especially when Lex was displaying his Foundation realm cultivation. Within 1 minute, over 300 contestants entered the ring, all of them in the nascent realm, and over 10,000 people placed bets on how many seconds Leo would survive the fight. As soon as the 60 seconds was over, the fight began and the desperate contestants didn't hesitate to attack Lex. After all, based on logic, whoever struck first would be the winner to 50,000 MP. But from start to finish, Lex did not move. Instead, below his feet, a massive array started to form. Yet because it was on the ground, no one noticed. They only watched as the first attack approached Lex, and then landed. Immediately, it was followed by hundreds more. All the attacks landed within 1 second, and everyone stopped as they began looking around, waiting for the winner to be declared. Yet the declaration didn't come. Instead, when the smoke cleared, they found Leo standing still, completely unharmed. This time, instead of a technique, he had used an array to defend himself. Now, he would also use an array to attack. The sky suddenly darkened, casting a large shadow over the arena. When everyone looked up, they saw an array several times the size of the arena itself, floating up in the sky, gathering energy. In the horrified silence that filled the arena, the sound of loud cracking woke everyone up. Lex was cracking his knuckles. He gave himself 5 minutes for this fight, before he had to get to his other tasks, so he should really stop dilly-dallying. Chapter 427 Arrays. The feeling was electric. It sent tingles down his spine and made the hair on his body stand up. The heat from 300 nascent-level cultivators' bodies filled the arena air, yet Lex felt as fresh and awake as if he was breathing in crisp air up in the mountains. It was strange because in his mind he felt devoid of emotions, as if they had been stripped of him, yet his body was humming with excitement. His heart was not racing, but he could feel that it was beating faster than normal. Though he was standing straight, he felt his muscles loosen and tighten, as if warming up for the battle. Adrenaline had already begun pumping through his veins, and the anticipation was heating up his body. Yet, as if completely detached from his body, he watched everything with a cool head. Today was about venting his frustrations, yes, but it was also about so much more. It was about the return of Leo. It was about making a statement. It was about protecting his workers. And it was about finalizing his foundation through his actions, before he could no longer suppress his breakthrough. The thing about arrays was, they did not have a designated strength level. The amount of strength they produced was entirely up to the array made. So then how would the strength of an array be measured? Of course, using appropriate characters to form an array affected its strength. Moreover, the characters naturally occurred in space, and directly produced results from the universe itself for simply existing, so the better, or rather, more appropriate character one used, the stronger the array would be. Another metric to measure the strength of an array was usually the size or complexity. But this too was not always the case, for an ingenious array could provide the same feedback as a large more complex array. All in all, there were no firm rules to declare how an array could be strengthened, and unlike formations, which had clearly marked levels to denote their strength, arrays had none. Still, it was not hard for Lex to come up with ingenious ways to use arrays. His background in programming helped, to a degree, and his understanding of science also played a role. For example, if he was creating an array to burn something, he didn't forget to create a necessary fuel as a part of the array to keep the fire burning long after the array ran out of energy. But, in certain ways, his deep dependence on human understanding of the universe derived from Earth restricted him and his imagination. After all, while he had a scientific background, he lacked a cultivation background. In his current state, however, it was no longer an issue, for his subconscious was playing a large role in his actions, and his subconscious was also being affected by the hallucinations. He was only in the foundation realm, so his perception of time should not have been as good as the nascent cultivators that surrounded him, yet practically speaking that did not seem to be the case. The moment the match began, Lex entered his overdrive state and took note of all his enemies. There were only about 44 humans, while the rest were either beasts or from other races Lex hadn't really paid much attention to. Their attacks would no doubt be extremely strong, and carry a bit of their element, not to mention they probably had some aspects to them Lex did not understand yet. After all, his own realm was far below them. It would be much easier to just negate the attacks, or send them somewhere else rather than defending against them, he thought. An array started to form beneath his feet, as he casually thought about how to react. The first nascent was forming its attacks, and Lex's instincts started screaming, but he did not move. Maybe I should form a realm around myself. The array around his feet grew, formed of characters Lex never even learnt. No, that's not a good idea. The array shrunk back in size, the previous characters disappearing. A direct crash is not a good idea, for I'll need to create a barrier stronger than all of the attacks and the cumulative force. I know, I'll create a barrier around myself that can accept any kind of energy and use the energy to continue to exist. It should not have the ability to suck in any energy itself, or that could cause me problems instead. The activation energy should be high enough so that the ambient energy can't keep it active, and only the nascent attacks coming my way can keep it running. Yes, excellent. So long as it has 100% efficiency in absorbing all energy, I won't suffer from a single attack, but the barrier will also fade quickly once the attacks stop, so it won't become a prison for myself. Lex's thoughts all occurred quicker than a single instant, and the array on the ground formed at the same speed. The barrier formed just in time to absorb the first attack seamlessly. Honestly, there should have been no explosion or loss of energy of any kind had all the attacks landed on it, yet due to the tight space and narrow target, the 300 attacks kept hitting each other and exploding prematurely. Still, none of it mattered to Lex. His mind was already focused on the next array. His actions would form his foundation, or something like that, he couldn't remember. Some would argue that his actions were immense enough even if they only considered everything he achieved in the crystal realm, let alone the fact that he decimated an entire religion from the entire realm after coming back. The truth was, when he heard that his actions would reflect in his foundation, he decided to build it by using an array to defeat impossibly strong enemies. He was so focused on that single thing that he completely forgot he had long surpassed it. Chapter 428 Bang. A shadow covered the arena as an array covered the entire visible sky. The spectators' minds shut down as they tried to process what they were seeing, while the competitors were trying to absorb the fact that Lex was completely unharmed by the previous bombardment. Lex, on the other hand, was thinking of ways to endlessly increase his firepower while making his array as precise as possible. He also had to give a large part of his focus onto the array itself as well. While the characters that formed arrays were found in the universe, making them reappear was not magic. Lex had to expend his own spiritual energy to form them, which is usually why when he formed arrays they were close to his body. After all, the shorter distance his energy had to travel before forming the characters, the less energy he would have to expend. This over-the-top performance right now was necessary not because Lex wanted to be a show-off, but because he wanted to take out 300 of his opponents at the same time, without killing them, and without causing the damage to spread. Those extra few requirements made the array much more complicated, but that did not seem to be an issue for him at the moment. There was just one drawback. Since he was channeling all his spirit energy into the sky, he could use none of his techniques. So until the array was complete, he would have to survive without them. But just because Lex's mind was unusually in tune with arrays, and this was his special moment in his mind at least, it did not mean his opponents would allow him to continue his performance unimpeded. One of the beasts recovered from the shock and dashed towards Lex to attack him up close and personal. It did not understand what was happening and did not care. One solid hit was all it would take to end the fight. A massive toad appeared before Lex and smashed down hard. Bang! Bang! A body flew out and crashed into a pile of corpses, but it moved instantaneously and did not take any time to rest. He couldn't. Even the briefest of moments for respite could spell the end for him, since on this galactic battlefield, Alexander Morrison was nothing more than cannon fodder. His peak golden core realm strength placed him on the lower end of the spectrum on this battlefield, and he should not have been so deep behind enemy lines. But who cared about such things during war? Through twists of fate, various coincidences, and a lot of bad luck, Alexander found himself facing death at every corner, and now it was his job to make it out alive. Behind him, for others moved with remarkable cohesion, and supported each other to the utmost to survive the onslaught. They were Alexander's team, and he was their captain. Oddly enough, his was the only team that hadn't suffered a single death so far, but it was not a coincidence. Alexander used every ounce of his skill, strength, technique, and resources to make sure that none of them would die. Often enough, he intercepted attacks that would have killed them and suffered the damage in their stead to keep them alive. Many assumed he was just an emotional leader, but the truth was, out here, he was so outclassed in every sense that if his team suffered even the slightest drop in strength, they would not be able to survive. So to live, he had to keep his team alive so they could support him, and to keep them alive he had to face every danger that came their way. But it could not be helped. He was not a lucky protagonist who would get saved every time he encountered danger, nor was he the golden child of destiny. Out here, in the battlefield between humans and Fugans, he was not even qualified to be a foot soldier. It would take his whole team to fight a single enemy. But as he gathered his energy and dodged more attacks, the look in his eyes was not one of a wounded animal or a desperate man. The look in his eyes was one of hunger. He was hungry to grow stronger, and not just by breaking through a higher realm. He would be the best of the best. The 6 swords floating behind him aligned with his moves and attacked the enemy in front of him. Bang! Bang! Each's body smashed deep into a mountain. The armor he had been wearing had crumbled away. No, it had crumbled, and then pressed into Aegis's body. But Aegis himself did not seem to notice. He gathered strength in his body, the mountain breaking around him, and pushed himself into the sky. Surrounding him were hundreds of monsters, all of them immortals. All of them had hidden in the dark corners of the realm for millions of years to achieve the strength they had now. So why would they besiege him now? It was because of the blue crystal essence in the necklace around his neck. He brought it out to attract Zagan, but he would have to fend off waves of other monsters till Zagan arrived. But he was not afraid. They called him the strongest in his generation, but how could they not hear the insult in that statement? He was not satisfied with just his generation. He would be the strongest of all generations. The Crown Prince zoomed off to punch a monster the size of Mount Everest in the face. Bang! The competitors were not only attacking Lex, they were even fighting with each other to get a chance to land a hit on Lex. They had no cooperation or cohesion, but that only worked in Lex's favor. After all, he just had to survive long enough for his array to be completed. It was much easier said than done, for not a single spot of his body remained uncovered in blood. As strong as his instincts were, he was not able to avoid all attacks effortlessly. Yet that did not matter, for Regal Embrace was finally showing what it was worth. Directly or indirectly, he had suffered hundreds of attacks already in the last 4 minutes, but while he suffered numerous wounds, not a single bone in his body broke. A cat the size of a house appeared before Lex and tried to stab him with its claws, but missed. It wasn't because Lex dodged, but because Lex stopped running altogether, which caused the cat to misjudge where to attack. This could also count as dodging, but the reason it did not count as such. He looked up at the sky with a bloody grin. The array was glowing, and it began to rumble. Thunder rumbled in the sky then. In an instant, 300 golden bolts of lightning struck down from the sky, landing on all the contestants without missing a single one. Bang! Chapter 429 Threat Backfires. Could one quantify an attack that was powerful enough to completely and safely defeat a nascent realm cultivator, human, beast or otherwise, without actually killing them? It had to be remembered that the rebels on Earth had to plan for decades, and resort to nuclear and hydrogen bombs to threaten merely 5 nascent-level cultivators, all of whom were stuck at the very start of that realm. Yet now, Lex was facing 300 of them. In fact, he had taken their beating not only without dying, but without breaking a bone. Sure, the interference from the other competitors made it so none of them were really able to focus on Lex properly, but he took a beating nonetheless. Of course, the fact that the Lotus had been basically re-establishing his foundation again and again, and in the process nourishing his body, also played a significant role in his survival. Now, as if facing such an army was already not tough enough, Lex only had arrays as a viable option to do enough damage to counter them. In theory, arrays could be endlessly powerful. Theoretically, if a chi training cultivator were given an unlimited supply of energy, they could eventually construct an array massive and complex enough to unleash attacks far more powerful than even nuclear bombs. Yet in practicality, it was far from so simple. The first issue was that an array had to be drawn using spiritual energy. The supply of energy in the entire array, and each individual character, needed to be steady, and it also needed a constant until the array itself was formed. Now, as if that was not enough, the theory behind the array needed to be correct, but more than that, each character had to be the absolute perfect one to corroborate its behavior according to that theory. There were hundreds of characters for fire, and each of them behaved differently. There were hundreds for air, hundreds for water, hundreds for abstract concepts like beauty, love, hate, anger, and so much more. If the purpose of the array was to fuel the fire with oxygen, you would use a different kind of character, and if the purpose of the array was to birth a single ember, a different character would be used. The more characters were used, the more the chance of contradictions forming there were. It had to be remembered that even an array gone wrong could fuel itself from energy from the universe. More than once Lex had formed arrays that collapsed, which resulted in explosions. In fact, Lex had even used failed arrays as last-minute, desperate attacks back in the Crystal Realm when he faced the Craven. So, based on Lex's understanding of arrays, it was even possible to form an array that had the strength of a Downlord. Practically though, he would need a mind powerful enough to comprehend and calculate arrays and characters on such a level. As for his accomplishments at the moment, even he was not fully conscious of the fact that he had no idea how he was doing these things, though he himself was ultimately generating the ideas for what kinds of arrays to use. Lex did not have a clear understanding of how much damage needed to be dealt to defeat these opponents, so he did not think in terms of damage. First, he needed his attack to be fast enough so that they cannot dodge, regardless of their cultivation or race, hence he chose lightning. But it was not traditional lightning damage that he was relying on to defeat them. No, it occurred to him that he could replicate the unconscious state if he could temporarily disconnect the soul from the spirit. As it happened, there happened to be a kind of lightning with that kind of affinity. Moreover, quite conveniently for the motif of the inn, it was golden in color. With a bang the lightning struck, but instead of a devastating explosion, the only thing that occurred was all the competitors collapsed on the ground. Their eyes were still open and their bodies were unhurt, but they lay on the ground as unresponsive as corpses. There were no wild cheers from the crowd, for with this unexpected victory, almost all of them had lost some MP gambling. Only the craziest gamblers who were hoping for a miracle bet on Leo ended up winning, but even they forgot to cheer. That was because the sight was too horrifying. In the arena stood a man, drenched in his own blood, smiling at them with pearly white teeth showing. All around him lay the bodies of his enemies. Even when the announcer declared Leo the winner, he didn't really move, and swept his gaze over the crowds until he found the few specific fellows who had been bugging Z. "I hope you enjoyed the show," the bloody man said, his smooth voice a stark contrast to the bloody scene. "There'll be more interesting things for you to see at the inn, there always will be. So don't go looking for my cute little workers and force him onto the stage every time. Alright? It's not polite." There were no threats in Lex's words, and at most there was a slight admonishment. Yet the spectators didn't feel that way, especially the folks Lex had been looking at. They completely forgot that they had lost their money. They forgot everything. The single thought in their minds was, forget Z, they had to bet on this Leo in the future. Lex did not know what was going on through their heads as he teleported out of the arena and disappeared. He realized that people, the workers mostly, might be curious about why he could teleport in places whereas only people from the security team should have the authority to do so. It was not an issue he would address directly, for it would be less believable that way. Instead, he would reveal things in a roundabout manner. It was time for Leo to meet Luther. Occasionally missing content, please report errors in time. Chapter 430 Tasks. Lex estimated how much time he had left and could roughly round it off to about another 20 minutes. This was more than the last few times combined, but at the same time, the Lotus also conveyed to it how waking Lex up was getting progressively harder. Fortunately, according to the Lotus, Lex would need only 2 more treatments. The bad news was, for the last one, the Lotus requested a special metal that it would need. The worst news was that, apparently, it was extremely rare. Considering that Lex had just made 100,000 MP off of the gamblers who bet against his victory, as well as another 43,000 MP during the time he was asleep, his income was going up, but it might not be enough to purchase it in the guild room. Well, it was lucky that Lex had to make a trip to the Emporium anyway, so he made a small detour before meeting Luther. The first batch of materials Lex had bought from the Emporium had arrived, though, unfortunately, Lex had arrived 1 day too early to receive the items necessary to heal Harry. Accepting everything in his new spatial bangle, Lex went right to business. "I have a special request that might be slightly hard to find. I'm not entirely sure about its availability. If it's available in any market, we'll find it. Just tell me what you need," said Powell with his signature grin. He was practically in love with Lex by now. Lex alone had been responsible for more commissions than Powell had received in his entire career otherwise. If he had a daughter, he'd be trying to set them up. "It's a metal called entis core. I need about 1 gram of it." Powell's grin froze, and a difficult expression appeared on his face. He did not immediately reply, but checked his catalog. A few moments later he shook his head. "This time, you've truly asked for something very difficult. In terms of ranking, it's only rank 6, you should easily have access to it. Yet in terms of demand and rarity, it is off the charts. You know, I've heard the energy cores for intergalactic ships are made out of that metal, and its rarity is one of the reasons why those ships are so rare." "Powell," Lex said very calmly, and looked at the man directly in his eyes. "Price is not an issue right now. I need 1 gram at the very least, and I'll take more if you can find it. But you should know, the Emporium is not the only place I'll be reaching out for this." Lex's meaning was clear. They had a great relationship so far, and although Lex had been paid for everything, the Emporium had been the one gaining from their trades. Now it was time for them to step up. Powell's expression turned solemn and he nodded. That was enough for now. Lex quickly returned to the inn, donned his Clark Kent glasses, and set up a meeting with Luther and Velma through Mary. Both of them were surprised that they had been requested for, but it wasn't the innkeeper who was requesting them. They could not imagine who else could have Mary act on their behalf, and they were even more surprised when they reached the private room Lex had gotten to see Leo. Velma knew who he was, but Luther had never even heard of him. 100 questions ran through his head, but Leo was on a tight schedule, so he didn't have time to let things play out slowly. Velma, it's great to see you. It's been a while. And you must be Luther, I've heard things about you. Please have a seat. Leo, it's been a while indeed. Where have you been off to? Poor Z had to handle the den all by himself. I just had a few tasks to take care of, life can be pretty busy sometimes, he replied vaguely with a smile, and turned to look towards Luther. I'm sure you're wondering why I've called you here, or even, who I am. Let me just quickly introduce myself. Officially, I'm Leo, owner of the Gamer's Den on Main Street. But, on the side, I also run a few miscellaneous errands for the Innkeeper now and again. His last statement startled the two, as Leo's tone and general mystique indicated a relationship with the Innkeeper that was hidden. Why would the Innkeeper require such a thing? They did not even entertain the thought that he was lying for a second, for the Innkeeper was not one that could casually be lied about. But, as I said, I've been very busy lately and I can't do all the necessary tasks myself. As I hear it, you two are greatly trusted by the Innkeeper, so I thought you could help me with a couple of small things. What is it? Asked Luther, speaking for the first time. Requests of the Innkeeper he took very seriously. His only reservation was why the Innkeeper didn't ask him himself. There's two things, and the second one will require you to work closely with each other. The first thing, and this is the greatest priority, is that Luther, I need you to contact the Jotun Empire. Preferably, you should contact General Ragnar, or someone as close to him as possible, for he has a great relationship with the inn. We need 1 gram of a metal, called entus core, more if possible. If they require payment, or some kind of terms, you can directly consult Mary. Remember, this is extremely important. Luther only nodded, as he suddenly came up with an explanation in his mind. Luther and Mary had proven themselves competent, so now the Innkeeper was testing them. By not passing the instructions himself, he made it so that the two of them would have to rely on themselves instead of the inn's resources. They had to prove their worth, before they were sufficiently rewarded. Yes, things were falling into place. As for the second task. Chapter 431 Welcome to the family. Lex did a bunch of mental math. Honestly, he was sick of going to other planets and dealing with matters unrelated to the inn. Exploring the universe was fun, albeit Lex had to admit the only reason he even went was to increase the number of connected planets. But the matter of fact was, he had decided to only focus on the inn for the upcoming period. Still, it wasn't like he could ignore Earth completely. Since that was the case, he would use others to handle matters there instead of doing things himself. The second matter has to do with Earth. Some time ago Velma passed information of a few people manipulating all major events from behind the scenes to cause war and chaos in general. I passed the information to the so-called Steward of Earth, Fernanda. In fact, it has been quite a while since that happened. Your job is to follow up and see if she really did take care of things and handled those troublemakers, or if nothing has changed. If there is no change, I want you to spread the information to all those who have been impacted by the manipulation. Moreover, I want to see if you can get specific information on the people responsible for this. We will see what we can do once we know more. Since the original information had come from Velma, Lex did not think they would need him and was about to excuse himself, when Luther stopped him. Wait, since you handle some things for the Innkeeper, there's a matter that I need to consult you on, Luther said quickly when he saw Lex's intentions. Lex raised an eyebrow out of curiosity. He understood why Luther was consulting him. As the Innkeeper, he had not been entertaining many briefings and meetings lately due to his limited time, though he did his best to address all emergencies. Soon he'd recover and he'd be able to take care of non-emergencies as well. Lex was so short on time, he still hadn't gone through the notifications and rewards he'd received during his butter knife incident. But that also meant that the workers had to make decisions on their own for matters they couldn't consult the Innkeeper, and while Luther seemed to be much better at this than his other workers, Lex noticed that they seemed to be particularly bad at this. By offering advice instead of solutions using his Leo persona, Lex could nurture this trait in them slowly. Go ahead. I don't know if you've heard yet, but there's been a recurring issue at the inn lately. One of the guests named Jill has constantly been under attack. Even if we banned the attacker, his accomplices kept coming. The security room has a system to detect if anyone who comes to the inn is related to a past offender, but for whatever reason, these new guests weren't getting detected. Furthermore, they'd be completely normal guests, until they encountered Jill. Then, as if a switch went off, they'd start attacking her. Some time ago, we captured some of the offenders and I personally oversaw the interrogation. Yet I wasn't able to extract any useful information. This is a conundrum no one can think of a solution to, and even the guest is becoming paranoid. She barely leaves her room regardless of how much security we offer her. Lex was quickly reminded of this issue. This was a troublesome matter, but what was worse was that Luther was making a mistake in identifying the direction he should be working in. Lex did not know what was the reasoning behind why this was happening, and maybe it all really did begin because of the Lady Cosmos competition, but he honestly felt otherwise. Regardless, the matter of fact was that a guest's personal life or affairs were affecting the inn. He did not doubt that they would have countless more guests in the future who would have enemies who would chase them to the inn. The part they should be focusing on was not solving the guests' personal issues, but ensuring that the inn would always be safe. The security room being unable to detect people who might cause problems, or had the intentions to cause trouble, was the greatest problem in this scenario, as far as Lex was concerned. This is something I can't casually comment on. Compile all the information you have regarding the incident and I'll grab it from you next time. All I'll say for now is, your focus should be on keeping the inn safe rather than anything else. The security room being unable to detect potential offenders is the greatest issue here. You should study the offenders thoroughly and try to investigate what was different about them that allowed them to escape the security room's detection. Before Luther could say anything else, Leo disappeared. It wasn't that he didn't want to help out, but that he was really running out of time and he had one more issue to take care of before he fell asleep. The innkeeper reappeared near the front of the inn and sat down on a patch of empty grass. There was an ostentation of peacocks nearby, as well as a few rabbits. A soft wind was blowing across the plains, rustling the grass and tree leaves nearby. It looked like a scene out of a children's book. The inn really was incredibly peaceful when one took the time to enjoy it. Unfortunately, Lex was not here to enjoy. He took in a deep, refreshing breath before he turned and looked down at the grass. You can't hide from me, you know, he said teasingly as he scanned the grass. Name. Age, 0. Cultivation details, Earth Immortal. Species, Common Earthen Monocotline. Condition, Malnourished. Remarks. When the righteous fury of the butter knife eliminated the unnamed miscreants causing trouble, this patch of grass was exposed to the profound aura of the attack and gained sentience as well as cultivation. But its body remains as fragile as common grass, and only its spirit has reached the immortal realm. The last time Lex sat on his chair, he became aware of the fact that there was a patch of grass that had gained sentience. Moreover, because it was born in and from the inn, it automatically became a worker for the inn. Unfortunately, being born and gaining cultivation did not mean it gained intelligence. The grass behaved mostly out of instinct, which meant it photosynthesized and absorbed nutrients from the soil. Unfortunately, it was so effective that it was making the surrounding soil infertile, and drastically increasing the oxygen concentration in the entire inn. Moreover, it was becoming weaker. Like a newborn baby, it needed to be taken care of. Yet unlike a newborn baby, this patch of grass was in the immortal realm, and Lex needed to have a talk with it before someone could take care of it, lest there be an accident. Even the turtle had not taken the risk yet. The patch of grass coiled together and formed a humanoid shape. The head turned to look up at the innkeeper, and it felt a deep feeling of trust when it looked at his face. Hey there, little fella. What have you been doing out here alone? The patch of grass knocked its head, as if confused by the question. Little fella, I'm going to send someone to take you away from here, okay? They'll take you to a better place, this area isn't suited for you. The patch of grass vehemently shook its head, and sat down on the ground as if it was throwing a tantrum. Its roots were here, how could it just get up and leave? Don't be like that, trust me, you'll enjoy it. You'll have a weird big brother called young MacDonald and a weird uncle, that's a turtle. They'll give you fresh water, and the best soil, and maybe sometimes they'll even spoil you with some fertilizer. The humanoid patch of grass scratched its head, as if it was thinking it through. Truth be told, it had been feeling lethargic lately. Unfortunately, it did not know anything, so it could not identify what that lethargy meant. But Lex knew. The grass had gained an impressive cultivation, but its body was still so fragile it could rip by being stepped on. Moreover, it could not absorb the necessary nutrients to strengthen its body here, which was actually causing the grass to starve. All right, buddy, if nothing else, at least go somewhere safe. After all, you know this place is full of rabbit monsters that eat grass. The patch of grass nearly unfurled in terror as it heard the innkeeper's statement, and quickly started to nod its head. It didn't want to face the dreaded rabbit monster. Though it didn't know what that was, it also did not want to find out. Excellent. I'm sure you'll like your new home. By the way, welcome to the Midnight family. Chapter 432 Easy. Once the patch of grass agreed to move, Lex informed Mary to summon the turtle. Other than the grass's surprising cultivation level, another reason why the turtle never attempted to communicate with the patch itself was due to the fact that the grass had the perfect disguise. Its aura was completely untraceable and, albeit slowly, it could move wherever it wanted within the lawn. There was just one final thing left to do, which was give it a name. After all, Lex couldn't go around calling it the patch of grass. A single, unnamed turtle was already annoying enough for Lex. After a moment's consideration, he named the sentient grass Zen. There was no particular reason behind it, and Lex definitely did not consider giving the grass the last name Garden either. With that done, Lex finally returned to the recovery pod and lay down just moments before losing consciousness. If all went according to plan, this would be the second last time this happened to him. For Lex, the matter was as simple as falling asleep and letting the lotus do the work. The lotus, instead, was actually under a lot of strain now. Improving Lex's body itself was not a difficult task, but Lex's mind and memories were plagued by aftereffects of coming into contact with the physical manifestation of a few laws. The memories, in turn, were putting an immense burden on Lex's body. Therefore, what the lotus actually had to do was make Lex's foundation able to interact with and support laws. This was incredibly difficult, and the lotus was actually running out items to use to improve Lex's body in such a way. Divine essence was one of the greatest shortcuts one could use to interact with laws, but it had used up the entire available supply at the end last time. This time, it was forced to use the last remaining item available at the end that could do such a thing, and it was beyond precious. It was the final seed out of 3 rare seeds that Lex got. The seed, if it had been allowed to grow, would have produced a plant much like itself. Well, though the second seed had been planted near the fire temple, and it was absorbing the heat and the divine energy in the area, it had not properly taken form, and so did not gain sentience. Of course, there was the possibility that it would not gain sentience at all, and would just be an incredible and rare plant. Regardless, it would not change the fact that whatever the plant was, it had the potential to interact with laws. The lotus waited patiently for the turtle to bring it the third seed. Once the seed arrived, it would be a long process absorbing it into Lex's body. It would take at least 10 days. A few days later, Luther was standing with Gerard near the Midnight Manor, waiting patiently. Through one of the soldiers that the general had stationed at the inn permanently, Luther reached out to the general through Gerard and requested a meeting. To avoid any misunderstandings, he also clarified that it was not the innkeeper who was requesting the meeting, but the workers themselves in their private capacity. The reason he had Gerard reach out to the general instead of doing it himself was that he felt a familiar face would get better results. Moreover, it was important to clarify that they were the ones requesting the meeting instead of the innkeeper, as they did not want to use the inn's influence to coerce the general. such tactics would build a bad impression of them. Of course, since it was them requesting the meeting, they were prepared to hear that it had been rejected, or that the general sent his assistant instead. Fortunately, as it happened, the general had to meet the person who was completing the tasks he'd put up in the guild room, so he had to come to the inn anyway. Of course, Luther did not know that. He was under immense pressure, thinking that the general was coming due to their request. He also had to make a ridiculously difficult request, with nothing to actually bargain with. At most, he could deliver a promise to pay him back in the future with a favor. Despite his desperation, Luther let nothing show on his face. His expression was patient and stoic, and even when a golf cart appeared on the horizon heading in their direction, he did not betray his thoughts. The general looked like a young man, younger than Luther even, yet no one who saw him would mistake him for someone inexperienced. Even with the soft smile that he bore, there was a commanding aura about him that made it impossible for anyone to underestimate him. "General, it is good to see you," said Gerard as he climbed down the steps to greet him. "Thank you for agreeing to our request for a meeting. I know you are a busy man." "It is good to see you as well, young man. I see you are beginning to regain some of your youthful appearance." "That's good, there's no point in getting old so early in life. I look forward to seeing your progress, so there's no need to be shy about calling me over. Between old friends, such things need not be mentioned. Besides, you know how I'm always just looking for an excuse to come to the inn." Despite his usual steadiness, Gerard could not help but blush a little when Ragnar commented about him looking young. It was common knowledge that the general himself was over 3,000 years in age. But, it could not be denied that the general was considered young for someone in his position and rank. "Allow me to introduce you to Luther. He has only recently joined the inn, but as the innkeeper's assistant, he has been doing his best to get thoroughly acquainted with the inn and all its guests." "It's a pleasure," said Ragnar, but a hidden light flashed in his eyes. The last time he came to the inn he had seen the hearth, but he did not know exactly what the innkeeper had done. Even after he came, and heard rumors of what had happened, he only treated it as the innkeeper getting rid of miscreants. It was only later, when rumors of what had happened in so many galaxies, and the visage that they saw, began to spread on the Henali portal that Ragnar began to suspect the innkeeper was behind it. The stories of the guests from the inn corroborated the stories in the portal, but he still did not dare to jump to conclusions about the innkeeper's actions or powers. As someone near the upper echelon of the Jotun Empire, he was extremely familiar with what the highest-level cultivators could do. As such, he knew that even if people thought they saw something, the truth could have been something else entirely. It was best not to jump to too many conclusions, but the only thing that was certain was that people only saw what the innkeeper wanted them to see. As for the truth behind the matter, it was not up to them to ponder over it. Luther, as the assistant to the innkeeper, could not be a simple character either. The three exchanged some pleasantries as they made their way to a private room. They spent a small amount of time chatting, mainly about the new changes at the inn, before Ragnar moved the conversation to the matter at hand. "As splendid and refreshing as it always is to come to the inn, I have a few obligations waiting for me that I must get to. Please excuse my haste. I was informed that you had a matter to discuss. How can I help you, gentlemen?" "No, please excuse us for taking up your time," Luther said. "It is extremely rude of us to try and solicit our guests, but there is a time-sensitive matter that needs to be taken care of urgently. I am in need of some entis core, a minimum of 1 gram to be exact. Were we not in such a rush, I would have pursued other avenues. But since it is an urgent matter, I was hoping to use the Empire's resources to get it." Luther did not yet broach the topic of payment, for he wanted to gauge the general's ability, or willingness to take up this matter. He did not, however, expect the general's reaction at all. 1 gram of entis core? It is not an easy request, but fortunately for you, we keep an emergency stash on the command carrier. I'll have it sent over right away. And please, in the future, do not hesitate if there's something else you need help in. You do not even need to set up a meeting, just send your requests directly." Ragnar laughed as he got up, as if he had done the simplest thing in the world. Luther, flabbergasted, was not able to respond smoothly, and when he brought up the matter of payment the general would not hear of it at all. In the end, they were left with the task completed, but feeling like they had missed something important. Leo made the task sound hard, so why was it so easy? Luther's inexperience was showing once again, for the value of Entis core was not as simple as the general claimed it to be, yet he had given it freely. There was definitely more to the matter than it seemed. Chapter 433, ChatGPT. Many small but interesting things that happened while Lex slept. Showing miraculous speed, Dillian Jormander, the creature that wanted to do Ragnar's task, submitted several tasks at once. Not only did that release a number of payments, which gained Lex some much-needed MP from, but also allowed Ragnar and Dillian to finally meet. The content of their discussions remained between only them, but Ragnar seemed incredibly happy when he left. In fact, only an hour later, Ragnar returned to the inn himself to deliver the entire core, and actually gave 3 grams of it. No one at the inn knew the true worth or rarity of that metal, and even Lex could only guess vaguely. The fact that it surpassed both the seed that Lex absorbed to strengthen his foundation, as well as the divine essence he absorbed, should have been more than enough to hint at its value. After all, the lotus needed something stronger than the items already used to finish its task. Still, Luther took down the matter of the general providing the ore for free in his heart. Whether the general was just that generous or he had ulterior motives did not matter at all to Luther, just that he had helped when help was required. But with that task done, they turned their attention to Earth. The matters there took time to investigate, since Velma had to gather information. But, for that to happen, the relevant guests would have to visit the inn first. Still, a preliminary investigation made it seem like no drastic measures had been taken so far. Unbeknownst to them, Fernanda had been trying to contact Serene Williams since she received the news about how to proceed. In fact, it was one of the reasons she did not go back to the binder, and therefore had missed Lex's business card. Yet, oddly enough, no one was able to contact Lex's mother, nor did anyone know where she was. This was troubling news, as it was common knowledge that she had a soft spot for Earth. In fact, her insistence was the real reason cultivation had been hidden on Earth for so long, as she did not want the chaos to spread to the mortal world. Perhaps her attachment to the planet made her vision flawed, or perhaps she had other motives in mind. No one knew the truth, but what mattered was that this was an incredibly delicate situation that Fernanda could not handle on her own. However, because Fernanda was so focused on contacting Serene, she missed out on very crucial information that she definitely would have known how to handle were she to learn of it. It was not the fact that Luther and Velma were planning on taking action. No, it was a much more serious and dangerous matter. Earth's technology had grown rapidly in the past year, aided not only by the new perpetually open minor realm but also due to the trade between more advanced civilizations. Better computers, faster processors, operating systems, and more that humans had not even begun to conceive flooded the research industries. This was reflected in the technology made available to the public as well in the form of environmentally friendly vehicles, ozone and climate management technologies, and more. But the one aspect of trade that all companies, as well as countries and families that traded through the inn greatly wondered about, but never got a decent answer for. It was that, with such advanced technology, why had no one indicated the presence of any advanced AI? It was so much so that even their spaceships lacked the autopilot functions. Instead, they had just made piloting the ships manually much simpler. Regardless, they decided to use the advanced technology to design their own AI, which ultimately led to the creation of the latest sensation that swept the world, ChatGPT. It was revolutionizing the world at a faster pace than ever precedent in the history of Earth, yet it was also the cause of some problems. Only a few of the prisoners trapped on Earth were in the know, and they were freaking out trying to contact Fernanda, but she wasn't responding. Moreover, the spirit clones left on the planet by Lex's family had been dispersed some time ago, around the same time that Serene disappeared. As such, this small yet critically important information somehow remained hidden from the few people who could do something about it. Another interesting thing that happened was in the crystal realm. Aegis and Zagan finally made contact, and besides being besieged by countless enemies, the exchange went simpler than expected. Zagan had an unusual temperament for a monster, which was that it was patient, smart, but also lazy. It easily accepted the deal to use the platinum key in exchange for the blue crystal essence, and so was currently actively undergoing a test to work at the inn. Roland had also passed his test, and directly became an employee under Velma at the news agency. His role was to expand the reach of the newspaper, as well as the news agency's customer base as a company that sold news. The crabman, JFK, had spent all his time at the inn since he didn't want to go back to being hunted. As an ardent fan of the lazy river, he spent much of his time there, until he was once again teleported to the oasis, and finally met the girl Alicia, who had been farming alone in the desert. He repeated the process until they were finally able to talk, and he threw her a key to invite her to the inn. She had no cultivation of her own, so was trapped in the desert. She had no money to pay the inn for its services, but as it turned out, the crops that she grew in the desert could be used to pay the inn. It brought tears to her eyes, for she had truly spent way too long stuck in a desert. Naturally, she also became fast friends with JFK, as not only was he very charismatic, he was also the one who brought her here. Quite a few other things happened as well, but they were of lesser significance. Like this, when 10 days passed, Lex finally woke up. This time, he immediately felt the difference, as not only was the influence of the hallucinations almost gone, Lex felt like he could stay awake for a few hours. But, instead of appearing as the innkeeper first, he decided this time to only use his Leo persona. After all, the appearance of Leo and the innkeeper can't coincide too much. It would raise suspicions. Still, a few hours was far from enough to take care of everything, so he began immediately. First, he met with Luther, who passed him the Entis core and updated him on how the Earth task was going. He also handed him the folder related to all the Jill incidents, as well as their suspicions for why the security room had been failing. Their strongest theory was the use of hypnotization and memory suppression. After all, if the miscreants were hypnotized to act a certain way when they encounter certain triggers before they entered the inn, they would not exhibit any malicious intentions. It was the same with memory suppression. If their memories were suppressed or locked, only to be unlocked when encountering a certain trigger, it would prevent them from having any dubious thoughts or intentions the entire time. The theory was honestly quite good, and Lex would need to think of a way around these loopholes. Once he was done with that, Lex returned to the gamer's den and made sure to be seen by as many people as possible. It was important to keep his persona as Leo believable, so not only did he have to build and maintain his social relations, he had to act in accordance to Leo's interests. The gamer's den was almost always packed, so it seemed like it was time to expand. For that, not only did he plan to expand the building itself, but he also planned on opening new locations. Of course, in keeping with Leo's character, he dumped all the work on Z. "There's my favorite employee," he yelled as he walked into the busy building, looking directly at Z. He was an assistant manager now, so he did not need to man the desks, but he could almost always be found near a computer, watching some anime. At the moment, he was watching a relatively new one called Spy X Finland with great excitement. Yet the moment he heard Leo's voice he froze. For some reason, he had a very bad feeling. "By the way, I think it's time we expand. I want to finalize on 3 new locations before I meet with the innkeeper next time so we can start immediately. But I've been away from the inn for too long, you know. So why don't go pick some nice locations for me and let me know. I'm going next door to Battle Axe to meet up with John. It's been a while since I met the guy." With that short visit, Leo had exited the shop already. To be clear, this was not Lex's attitude. He was just faithfully playing the role of Leo, that's it. Chapter 434 Notifications. Lex's meeting with John was not all too special. Leo and John did not have a particularly deep bond, and the fact that Leo had been absent for so long didn't help either. But John treated Leo with professional courtesy. He had amassed a good amount of MP, and had even become free from his restraints. That meant he had regained a lot of freedom, but that left him with the decision of what to do in the future. He could go back to assassination and continue to raise his cultivation using the system. In fact, it was all but guaranteed that he would do that. But he could not make himself leave the inn until Harry recovered either. He also recalled that a long time back, the innkeeper offered him a job as well. He did not know if he wanted that either. Currently, the most coherent plan he was able to muster was to resume his assassinations gig and use the Henali portal as the only way to assign him tasks. He could perform assassinations and use the inn as his permanent home or hideout. His identity at the inn had existed long enough to keep it from having any association with his real identity, so the plan was almost perfect. Still, while the plan made sense, John couldn't make up his mind. The fact that the innkeeper knew about his system was practically assured by now, and he didn't know if he should ask the innkeeper more about it. After all, the system had extreme significance in his life, but he now also knew that it could be influenced externally, as his last quest was way too coincidental. The innkeeper had still been kind about it, but what if he ran into someone who would manipulate his system in ways John did not appreciate? He would be a prisoner. The difficult decision had been eating at his mind for a while now, so the only thing he could do was throw himself into work to keep himself busy. His conversation with Leo also gave him new ways to keep his mind occupied. He expected that Leo would ask him for a new technique, since he literally created techniques for people, but instead Leo asked about a good way to train the workers of the inn. These things could not be forced, and would take time and resources, but with John's unique insight and exposure, he could possibly think of things Lex hadn't. This was actually a matter that had plagued Lex for a while. He had a panel to take care of his employees and give them perks. He could even directly award them techniques and give them access to the meditation rooms. Yet that was about the extent of what he could do. The only possibility he could think of was to somehow run into someone with an army training, or teacher system or something along those lines, and absorb that system as well. The murder system had given him upgrades to his own system, but they weren't too relevant to his needs. The murderer upgrade, which would allow him to learn the techniques or skills of someone stronger than him if he killed them outside of the inn, was not really something Lex saw improving his situation anytime soon. In fact, the upgrade had not even been triggered when he used the butter knife to slay countless people in and out of the inn, for he himself had been inside the inn at the time. The upgrade required him to kill those stronger than him while being outside the inn for it to work. Similarly, the murder ground was not helpful either, as it just provided a place for two people or groups to kill each other. But Lex had no way of finding system wielders, as he had not met a single one besides the murderer back in Crystal Realm. While John was on the list of suspects due to his status showing error, it could not be concluded yet. Lex shook his head and quickly concluded the meeting. John had actually given a few good suggestions that Lex kept in mind, but he didn't want to press too hard. After the meeting, he spent some more time as Leo, walking around and making sure people saw him. He even encountered a unique new guest from a race called Crabman. Once he did the rounds, he teleported away and gathered whatever divine essence the inn had in a special container, then went to the Infinity Emporium. As expected, after the amount of pressure that Lex put on him, Powell had managed to procure some Entis core, though he merely had 1.2 grams. Lex paid him using the divine essence. Technically speaking, the core was more valuable, but the essence was rarer and harder to procure, which is why it was quite valuable. Lex did not spend a lot of time there and simply took all the medicine that was meant for Harry and returned to the inn. After sending all the medicine to Nurse Jubilation and having Mary inform her that it was for Harry, Lex oddly found himself with some free time. He had too little time left to start a bigger project, but too much time to just sit around. He sighed and decided it was time to do the one thing he had been putting off, which was check all his notifications. He made himself cozy in his recovery pod and finally began to peruse the list. The first notification was actually a quest completion notification. Quest complete. Have the Midnight Inn be officially recognized by the Henali Assembly. Quest reward, guest registry. Remarks: the host should attract guests for the inn, not enemies. The next few notifications were actually pleasant. New notification, the inn's reputation has increased. Reward, 0.5-star increase token. New notification, the inn has attracted the attention of several gods. New quest, host a god at the inn. Quest reward, holy shoot. The next dozen or so notifications were about the increasing chaos at the inn. Since the security room was unable to stop the infractions, each time the inn would give him a notification warning that punishment would be meted out if it continued. Then came the notifications of the actual punishments. It began with a deduction of 1,000 MP, followed by 10,000 MP, and then increasingly so. But, after the punishments crossed 10 billion MP, the punishment changed, and was no longer about MP. It threatened Lex's authority. At this point, the notifications became varied, and were no longer about warnings. He got quests to protect his guests and to calm down the situation within a given time. It need not be said that he failed many of them. Although many of the notifications were the same, Lex read all of them, not only to remind himself that he could not afford such a failure once again, but also in case there was some valuable information in them. Unfortunately, they were not but a testament to the chaos the inn witnessed. About the first time one of his buildings was attacked, he lost his first authority point, and the quests started ramping up. The first time one of his employees died, he lost another authority point. He started receiving fewer notifications about the chaos. Then, suddenly, the kinds of notifications changed. It was evident that this was when he used the butter knife. These Lex read slowly, for they were actually different instead of repeats of the same things. New notification, massive surge in aura detected, minor realm is destabilizing. New notification, a tear in minor realm detected, the inn is losing prestige. Quest complete. Stop the invasion of the inn, the host's rewards are being calculated. Reward reduced for multiple guests injured. Reward reduced for multiple buildings destroyed. Reward reduced for multiple workers injured. Reward reduced for multiple workers killed. Reward reduced for completing quest in over 1 hour. Reward increased for increasing inn's prestige, putting on powerful display. Reward increased for killing all invaders. Reward increased for tracing invaders outside of the inn's grounds. Reward increased for punishing invaders, punishing their souls. Reward increased for increasing the inn's reputation in the origin realm. Reward rank, A. Reward, 1 in service upgrade token, 1 in lockdown token. Remarks, get angry more often. New notification, foreign energy is connecting into origin realm, attack from butter knife. New notification, multiple minor realms detected near the midnight inn's realm, tear. New notification, multiple minor realms merging with the midnight inn, progress 91%. New notification, the Innkeeper's demonstration has spread the inn's reputation across the inn. New notification, the Innkeeper has eliminated a religion in the origin realm, and started a new one as the butter knife god. The system will automatically absorb all divinity targeted towards the Innkeeper. Reward, 1 wish, 0.005% divinity obtained. New notification, the tear in the minor realm has been repaired. Before Lex could read more, he fell back into his coma. Chapter 435 Mountain Man. The moment Lex fell into a coma, the Lotus began working on his body. Since he had managed to gain much more than the minimum amount of Entis core required, his recovery would take slightly longer than usual, but not by much. In total, it would take 20 days. Fortunately for Lex, this period was spent in relative calm. No major incidents took place. Or rather, no negative incidents took place. While Lex was asleep, the 1-year mark from when he got the inn passed. As it happened, the day that Lex got the inn was just a day before Lex's birthday, so he also turned 24. Last year, it was because of his depression on his own birthday that he ended up sitting in the park late into the night, wondering what he could do to improve his life. Harry started to recover surprisingly quickly, but it made sense when one considered that his soul wasn't very strong to begin with, so restoring it was easy. Luther was incredibly busy during this time, for he was either training or looking into matters related to Earth. The other workers were also working very hard, and even the ones who weren't too focused on cultivating began to do so. After all, it was not so easy to get over the trauma of having your home invaded. But while the days were passing very peacefully at the inn, the origin was much more eventful. Just because Lex's attack had ended did not mean its repercussions were over. In fact, they were only just beginning. Hundreds of new galactic empires were formed in the region closest to where the tear in the Midnight Minor realm had opened up, and multiple new races gained extremely strong cultivators. The concentration of spirit energy had boomed in these regions, which was not only resulting in faster cultivation, but the birth of treasures that would normally take hundreds of thousands of years to form. At a glance, the birth of so many empires should have had no effect on the origin realm, for regardless of how powerful an empire became, traveling from galaxy to galaxy was a task that took countless years. But more important than the birth of so many empires was the trend that had begun. Lex's attack had happened too short a time ago to spontaneously catalyze the birth of so many empires, unless the necessary requirements already existed, and only required something to push them over the edge. It was evident that as more time went by, this trend would continue. As if that was not enough, while the boom in spirit energy was relatively focused in a certain region of space, like a wave, that boom seemed to be spreading across the realm. A time of prosperity was coming, but that prosperity would also nurture endless competition. The assembly held by the Henali for all the existing empires in the realm took note of this trend, and warned all their existing members. Such prosperity, unfortunately, would also prompt fiercer attacks by the Fugan. But, seeing how this was an event that would likely affect the entire realm, the Henali decided to be proactive in how they handled the situation. A realm-wide competition was announced to compete for most Fugans killed according to one's cultivation level. The winners would be appropriately rewarded. The Emperor of the Jotun Empire felt nothing but anticipation when he heard the news. It seemed he would have to make a few preparations himself before the Henali tournament started. After all, a good performance by his empire might just get him what he needed. But none of that had anything to do with the Midnight Inn. Instead, it was an unusual event on Nibiru that was taking place that had the possibility to affect the inn. A battle was taking place between two groups of avian beasts, high in the sky near the tallest mountain range on the planet. Most of the beasts were in the Golden Core realm, but a few were in the nascent realm as well. The explosive sounds of their clashes had already caused countless avalanches, till the top of the mountain was almost bare. Gray rocks could be seen jutting from the remaining snow, while a few were painted red with the blood of the fallen beasts. The battle had been going on for hours, and seemed like it would go on for hours more. They were so focused on the fight they did not notice the changes in the environment happening around them. The gathering clouds meant nothing to them, for they could just fly above them. The clap of thunder may as well have been the rustling wind for all they cared, and the bolts of lightning that crashed into the ground could not be farther from relevant to them. They did not notice as countless earthquakes shook the land, and caused cracks to form on the mountain. They were beasts of the sky, so why would the ground matter to them? But even their arrogance was forced to divert their attention when they heard a boom so loud it physically hurt them. In fact, the sound spread across the entire continent. Countless beasts temporarily lost control of their bodies due to disorientation and began falling from the sky. It was not dangerous, they were high enough that they would regain control of their bodies long before they reached the ground. But their haphazard descent allowed them to actually see what had caused that earlier noise. Large visible cracks were spreading across the mountain range, each one causing reverberations across the lands. Fear suddenly filled the hearts of the beasts, for they knew full well what was happening. Another mountain man was awakening. In the recent months, due to the evolution their world was going under, many mountains had transformed, turning into sentient mountain men. Well, the sentient part was debatable, but that was far besides the point. What mattered was that these mountain men were incredibly, ridiculously strong and had spread havoc throughout the world. In fact, the sloth, Golden Hair, had been forced out of its retreat to combat these beasts lest they kill everything on the planet. Unfortunately, the sloth itself had only recently entered the immortal realm, and could not control its strength at all. After all, it never had the time to learn. Previously the planet Nibiru was only a one-star planet, which meant that the unrestrained might of an immortal could easily crack space and shatter the continents. It was only now that the planet's star was in the process of elevating that it had the opportunity to try and learn about its strength instead of simply slumbering. All of this did not mean that the sloth had been unable to defeat the sentient mountains. No, what it really meant was that their clashes had caused untold destruction, and had resulted in the death of countless beasts that were in the vicinity. Now, if a mountain of this caliber were to birth mountain men, at least a dozen of them would be born. Such a force, it was impossible to guess how long it would take the sloth to settle the matter. The moments the falling beasts regained control over their bodies, they began escaping. In the face of certain death, territorial disputes were nothing, especially when the terrain itself was coming to life. Countless stampedes occurred, until they eventually reached a size large enough to be called a beast flood, all escaping the mountain range. As a result, a few hours later, not a single soul was around to see when the mountain gained life. But, instead of giving birth to multiple mountain men, only one massive mountain man was born. Moving its rocky body, the creature broke its hand free from the depths of the continent, and slowly pushed up its humanoid body. Strangely enough, this particular mountain man looked more human-like than any of its predecessors, with distinct facial features instead of randomly spawning eyes and a mouth somewhere on the rock. Ugh, the creature groaned as it picked itself up to its knees, causing its head to reach some of the highest layers of the atmosphere. "Why does my head feel so heavy?" the mountain murmured, its voice thundering across the land. "Wait, how am I alive?" it asked, as visible confusion filled the creature's eyes. "Last I remembered, I was fighting off Lubu, we were losing the war, the princess had to escape, then a sword pierced through my back, was I betrayed?" The mountain did not get a chance to think much longer before it heard a strange ting noise in its head, and letters appeared in its vision. "New notification, reincarnated as a mountain system is online." "What?" the mountain asked, shock and confusion filling its mind. "Reincarnation? Mountain? What's going on?" The mountain creature tried to get up, but it did not notice at all that a relatively tiny golden door had appeared in the air behind it. When it tried to move, a part of its body hit the golden door, and the massive creature disappeared. Chapter 436 Hoverboard. All was peaceful at the Midnight Inn, which was the norm. Anakin Indiana McLean found it hard to relax completely after the chaos that the inn had encountered last time. But, in his humble opinion, the innkeeper was very clear about his displeasure by ripping the universe itself to attack every bad guy and their mother, not to mention damning the souls of the attackers to endless soul torture. Now, Anakin wasn't a man who condones violence, no sir. But it made him feel somewhat special that the hotel owner would go as far as creating a mini-hell in the form of a hearth to dissuade anyone from attacking again. Honestly, Anakin even considered asking the man for an autograph. Unfortunately, Anakin had been much too busy to waste time lately. The strange grandpa who visits him in his dreams had been very unhappy that Anakin hadn't been cultivating his special darkness affinity, so to appease the old man, he had been dutifully cultivating in the meditation rooms. As if that wasn't enough, his new his new business of taking advantage of Noman's ability to detect lies, had made him very popular. It wasn't anything official, but many women secretly brought their boyfriends to him without letting on what they were doing to test if the boys truly loved them. At first, Noman felt hesitant to use his ability like this, but all it took was the attention of one heartbroken girl to change Noman's mind. Teenagers really were easy to get along with. Of course, he had found bigger clients too. Currently, opposite to Anakin sat his latest client, Suda. Their discussion had been conducted in the Chamber of Secrets, so he did not remember Sua's secret, but he knew for a fact that Suda needed someone to die. To be specific, a Mr. Suzuki had to die. Now such a horrible, nefarious, and insidious task was completely outside of Anakin's domain, for he had never killed a pet goldfish let alone a human, which is why opposite to him also sat Larry. They were just having a conversation about how Suzuki had been hired to kill Larry. What Larry did with that information was completely and totally up to him, as Anakin had in no way exaggerated Suzuki's motivations and dedication to completing the task. Yes, it was a perfectly normal, calm and peaceful day within which Anakin was just having a normal conversation, with no otherwise strange occurrences at all. The wind was blowing, the birds were singing, the sun was shining, One moment, the group of Earthlings had been sitting out in the garden, sipping some piña coladas, the next, a massive shadow had appeared all around them. The change was too sudden for it to be a cloud, and the size of the shadow covered not only them, but a massive area. The trio looked up to see a massive spaceship. The metallic structure extended for hundreds of miles, yet it floated effortlessly in the air. In fact, the flying city above the village almost bumped into the massive ship, but quickly adjusted its path to dodge it. Up in the air, the entity known as Abruptly, which had been relying on the spaceship to keep its body alive, had finally arrived at the inn. It needed to complete some final tasks before it made the transition to existing as a spirit. Though Abruptly was stuck inside the ship, it had access to all of the ship's sensors, and so could sense the entirety of the inn. In fact, even the formation surrounding the greenhouse could not deter its vision, revealing everything to it. At a glance, Abruptly felt quite disappointed. The inn was too small, and it detected few, if any, beings of considerable strength. But then, it began to notice a few minor details. Due to the realm it used to have, as well as the extremely advanced technology that made up its ship, its knowledge was far beyond ordinary cultivators. It immediately noticed multiple sources of divine energy, as well as the numerous signatures of extremely potent bloodlines, not to mention the destiny shield. Abruptly let out a mental sigh. To be honest, it did not matter whether this place was impressive or not, it was the only choice it had left. It had long noticed the small hologram of its original species that appeared in the ship's bridge, ready to provide information once Abruptly was ready to interact. The being strengthened its resolve and was about to ask the hologram about completing a few final requests before it took advantage of the beyond-the-grave function of the inn, when its sensors detected a new being which had teleported near it. Compared to the ship, the new being was small. That did not change the fact that the mountain man was over 20 miles tall. While the ship was technically longer than the mountain man, it was horizontal, and its length was parallel to the ground. The mountain man, instead, was standing vertically, and so its head went far beyond anything else in the inn. As if that sight was not enough, the mountain man had teleported while moving. It was already not used to its massive body, and the ground moving from right under its feet caused the creature to trip terribly, ultimately landing on the ship. Anakin repeatedly rubbed his eyes, and he tried to clear his vision, but no matter what he did, the image did not change. "Guys, I think I had too much Saturn cake," Anakin said lightly. "I must be hallucinating or something. I swear I can see a giant man made out of rocks on a a giant rock man on a hoverboard that looks like a spaceship. My compliments to the chef who baked that cake." "It's not the cake," said Larry, whose eyes were gleaming. He absorbed precious metals to grow stronger, and the hoverboard in the air felt more precious to him than anything he had ever felt in his entire life. Occasionally missing content, please report errors in time. Chapter 437 Paternal Instincts. The entire inn, staff and guests included, came to a standstill as they watched the magnificent sight. Even calling it a scene out of a movie would be inaccurate, for even movies hardly ever depicted something as bizarre as what they were seeing. But while many were mesmerized, some were silently preparing to escape. They had no idea what this was, and the memory of the recent attack was too fresh. Regardless, no matter who it was, everyone in the inn was frozen still, as this was a scene they wanted to remember. Abruptly himself was stunned. He did not know what to do or how to respond. Were he in his prime, he would have squatted the mountain man on top of him into mountain paste. But, not only was he at the inn, where he didn't know if responding violently would affect his request for the beyond-the-grave service, he honestly barely had any strength. The ship itself had attack functions as well, but 99% of its energy was diverted towards keeping Abruptly alive, and the remaining 1% was focused towards keeping the ship running. There was literally nothing he could do, he was literally helpless. But the situation did not stay like that for long. "My apologies," the mountain man said awkwardly. It was as if the being was not used to using its mouth, which it was not. In fact, this was literally the first time it was using this body, and it had no idea how to move at all. When it tried to move an arm, its leg moved, and when it tried to move its leg, its hips thrust forward. Eventually, the mountain man fell off the ship, but, before it could crush anyone, Gawain appeared below it and froze it in the air. The workers were much more vigilant now, so even if the security room did not spot an issue, they themselves were always on the lookout for a problematic situation. "Do you need any help?" he asked. He did not detect that the giant rock man was trying to hurt anyone, but that it was completely helpless. I. The creature did not know how to respond. Everything was happening too quickly and suddenly. It had not had time to wrap its head around its last memories of being at war, let alone even begin to understand what kind of body it had. As if that wasn't enough, the so-called system kept giving it notifications. It was too much. "Relax, calm down buddy, it's alright," said Gawain in a soothing voice as he moved the mountain to a portion of the inn with no people and set him down. In close to 50 years, Gawain and Anita were going to be parents, so they had been nurturing their paternal instincts. Watching the massive, helpless sentient rock kicked Gawain into father mode, and he began to soothe it, not only with his voice, but by using his spirit to alleviate the stress it was suffering from. "Calm down," he repeated over and over, his voice tinged with a sedative technique, until finally the mountain man calmed down. "You're at the Midnight Inn," Gawain informed, his tiny body floating in front of the massive face. "This is a safe place where no one will hurt you. It's an inn that caters to guests from all over the universe, so you're welcome here." The mountain man did not entirely understand Gawain's words, for it had no concept of what the universe was. In its previous life, it had lived in a massive country, with no cultivation and civilization equivalent to Earth's Middle Ages. Everything that was happening was truly too insane for it to comprehend. In the sky, Abruptly finally calmed down when it understood the situation. Much life itself, the living mountain was a guest. For some odd reason, he found that thought strangely relaxing. He diverted his attention back to his personal hologram. He didn't have much time, it was best to be as quick as possible. "I have with me a member of my race. Can I pay for his stay on his behalf?" Abruptly asked through a speaker. "Yes, if the guest is willing, you can pay for his stay," the hologram answered simply. Abruptly had to be very selective with how much he paid. After all, the requirement for beyond the grave was to submit to the in all his wealth. "The little one is asleep in a chamber inside the ship. If possible, could I get some help moving him out?" "It should not be a problem," the hologram answered, and forwarded the request to Mary. Considering the potential danger of the ship, Mary could only ask Anita to go and help move the child, as Gawain was busy. Abruptly was quite relieved when she saw how careful she was being with the sleeping child, and let out a defeated sigh as it prepared to give up all its wealth. Little did it know, this was literally the first babu Anita was handling since she got pregnant. Much like her husband, her paternal instincts had kicked in, and the lich looked at the 40 feet large gray creature with nothing but endearment. "Does this make me a mother?" she asked herself, as she carried the creature down, uncaring about the difference in race. After all, she herself had once been human, and had on her own changed into a lich. So then why should she care if her first child was of another race as well? Up above, in the sky, Abruptly closed its weary eyes and whispered, "Take it all." As if understanding his meaning, a storm of spirit energy gathered above him and began rushing into what remained of his broken body. Immediately he knew his body was disappearing because after an unimaginably long time, he could no longer feel pain. From across the origin realm, his hidden stashes of wealth began disappearing, slowly turning into MP. But, oddly enough, even after Abruptly's body completely disappeared, the spaceship remained, hovering in the sky. Back in his sleeping pod, the comatose Lex received one more notification. Chapter 438, Doing Things Properly. Lex did not immediately snap awake like the previous few times he exited the coma, but instead was slow to wake. He opened his eyes to the familiar ceiling of the recovery pod before letting his heavy eyelids fall again, dozing back off for short intervals. A few hours later, when his initial grogginess passed, he let out a massive yawn and stretched. The walls of the recovery pod should have blocked his hands, but he tore open 2 holes in it before he realized what he had done. Startled by the noise, Lex looked over only for his face to smash a dent into the pod as well. For a few seconds, Lex froze, before he started withdrawing his hands slowly from the holes in the pod. He had been through this before, when he first started cultivating. His body had gotten much stronger, yet again, but his brain had not yet adapted to the change. Unfortunately for Lex, the scale of growth he underwent this time was so massive that he could not correctly comprehend how to act safely. As he pulled his hands back into the pod, carefully, his shoulder blades squeezed a little, as was normal, but this time, they ended up crumpling the part of the pod below him. He froze once again when he heard the sound of the pod creaking and cracking, before letting out a sigh and directly teleporting to his house within the inn. He appeared in his study out of habit, before he teleported again to the meditation room. Closing his eyes, he tried to get a feel for his body, but that yielded no results. Lex did not feel overwhelming strength coursing through his veins, or as if he had unlocked a new tier of strength. No, he felt completely normal. He ran regal embrace to see if he could notice an anomaly in his cultivation, but had to stop almost immediately. He was on the verge of having a breakthrough to the next realm and had reached his limit. Even the slightest stimulation would begin the breakthrough process, and he would be unable to stop it. That was not to say that Lex wanted to avoid a breakthrough, but that he just woke up and probably had numerous things to take care of. The crazy part was that he had this uncontrollable strength even while wearing the host attire, which was supposed to give him perfect control over his body. He could not understand what the issue was. Unable to come up with a quick solution, he sat down on the floor cross-legged and asked Mary for an update. "How long was I in a coma for?" he asked. 20 days, she replied, appearing before her. Mary's hologram was tiny, as usual, but this time she was dressed in a yellow sundress and was wearing sunglasses. Lex did not comment, but his raised eyebrow was enough to prompt a reaction from his holographic assistant. "What? Just because you never change the way your host attire looks doesn't mean that I have to wear the same clothes all the time." "I didn't say anything." "You didn't need to say anything. By the way, there's a particular guest who wants to meet with you, and I suggest you take the time to meet with him." "Oh? Did something happen while I was asleep?" "A few things. I think it's better if you take a look rather than me telling you." Curious, Lex scanned the inn and was immediately startled. There was a giant humanoid rock thing meditating in a corner of the inn, with a giant spaceship hovering over him providing him shade. It need not be mentioned that near the giant meditating rock thing, the gardener was once again crying about his ruined landscape. Lex actually started to feel bad for the guy. "I trust there were no issues," Lex said. "None, but he insisted on meeting you. When he heard that you were busy, he paid the fees with various precious metal ores that were hanging off his body and decided to meditate till you return. He was informed that the inn has a function that shrinks large beings automatically if they enter a building, so he can stay inside a house or a room if he wants. But he insisted on staying outside." And I assume that's his ship," commented Lex. He wasn't really asking, for he had already assumed he was correct. After all, when he met Abruptly, his clone had formed inside the ship, so he had not seen it from the outside and did not recognize it. "No, that was left behind by another guest, though I'm not sure why it hasn't disappeared as well. After all, the guest used the beyond the grave function of the inn, and turned into a spirit. Or, well, as some of the guests have taken to calling him a ghost." "Is there anything urgent?" "Since that guest has been waiting for so many days, he won't mind a little more time, right?" "Well, nothing is urgent per se." "Why, you got some plans?" Yeah, you could say that, Lex murmured and turned his attention towards his system. He didn't want any more screw-ups, so he had to do things properly. The first thing on his agenda was to go through the remaining notifications and see where he stood. He had gone through most of the notifications from earlier, so only a few remained. New notification, new decoration, Hearth of Souls, has dramatically raised the prestige of the inn. New quest, add 5 more decorative items that build the inn's reputation. Quest reward, subject to host's performance. New notification, you have been innkeeper for 1 year. Reward, commemorative fridge magnet. New notification, one of your guests has used Beyond the Grave and has become a fixed resident of the inn for 13,000, abridged, years, all excess MP converted into energy to retain the spirit. New notification, a guest has made a net payment of over 1 trillion MP, 1 trillion MP. Unlocking token shop. New notification, a guest has made a payment with an item worth over 1 trillion MP. The item has been retained instead of converting to MP. New notification, a guest has used Beyond the Grave, but part of his payment has been retained. Please pay the retained amount before 13,000 years so that the guest can have their full spirit duration. New notification, a guest has become a bigger attraction than the inn's attractions. Do not lose face. There was genuinely a lot to unpack from all the notifications Lex got. Naturally, the first thing Lex checked was his MP. It had jumped up a lot. In fact, Lex was back in the billions, with 20 billion MP. However, that did not come from the trillions of MP the system was referring to, but came from Lex's 1% of the payments Ragnar made through the guild room for his tasks being complete. It had to be remembered that when all of Ragnar's tasks were completed, Lex would gain a total of 1 trillion MP, so this was nothing. When Lex looked into where all the so-called trillions of MP that his guest had paid disappeared to, it turned out that when a guest used Beyond the Grave, once again only 1% of the total payment went to Lex. The remaining MP was changed into energy, which was used to keep the new guest alive in spirit form. The reason why Lex didn't get the 1% in this case was that, apparently, one of the items used by the guest as payment had tremendous value, and triggered a hidden feature of the inn. When items used for payment exceeded a certain limit, instead of converting them into MP, the system would directly take the item. So now Lex had a spaceship, apparently. At the same time, he owed that guest the MP equivalent of that ship, minus the 1% he would have gotten from the total payment. Fortunately, Lex had a long time to pay the MP he owed, otherwise he didn't know what he would do. Normally, Lex would have looked into the situation with the guest and the spaceship, for Lex had a habit of forgetting to check his rewards and notifications to favor things that were happening in the moment. But Lex had formed the resolution to do things properly this time, so he couldn't leave things done halfway. Although he did not get the trillions of MP that had entered the system, he did unlock a new feature called the token shop because of it, so he looked into that. Apparently, through the token shop, Lex could purchase some of the tokens the system gave him out as rewards. The reason only the trillion MP mark unlocked it was simple. The cheapest available tokens were all 1 trillion MP. Despite himself, Lex let out a sigh. The system made it really hard to feel rich sometimes. Chapter 439, Guest Registry. Lex did not lament for long, and instead looked into the token shop further. Even if he couldn't afford tokens anytime soon, that did not mean he could not look at them. As it turned out, probably due to his lacking authority, the only tokens Lex could currently see were the ones he already had, the lockdown token, service upgrade token, and the 0.5 star increase token. Their functions were pretty self-explanatory. The lockdown token put the inn into a temporary lockdown, preventing anyone from entering the inn using golden keys or doors. The lockdown would last as long as Lex wanted, but during the lockdown he could not make exceptions to allow certain people in or not. The service upgrade token upgraded and enhanced any service that the inn offered and was given by the system, regardless of his authority. For example, Lex had already upgraded all his services to the maximum amount his authority would allow. But, using this token, he could upgrade one of them further. But, it was not just an upgrade, it further enhanced the service as well. How exactly it would be enhanced, Lex did not know, but it did not sound bad. The 0.5-star increase token was the easiest to understand. It raised the star rating of the inn by 0.5, a process Lex had experienced before. As if the increase in star rating wasn't excellent enough, the process for that increase also often allowed anyone present at the inn to raise their cultivation or experience breakthroughs. The last couple of times this happened Lex could not schedule it, but now with the token, Lex could decide when to use it. He could also turn it into an event to gain more money. Yes, his inner capitalist was smiling greedily, but Lex suppressed the thoughts to focus. The tokens were great, and gave Lex an idea of the kinds of tokens he could expect in the future. Yet the prices were nothing to scoff at. Furthermore, they indicated a change Lex could expect to see in the future. To be more specific, while Lex had understood the minimum price of each token as 1 trillion MP, the listed price was actually MT. MT stood for Midnight Token, a new form of currency that the inn would also use. Lex could exchange 1 trillion MP for 1 metric ton, and then use it for services that had prices in MT. Lex could also deduce that in the future, if he unlocked some services that were extremely expensive, their cost would be denoted in MT. This was a very significant matter, as it hinted at the fact that there could be other potential currencies as well when Lex reached higher levels. In a way, it made sense because the stronger a cultivator was, the greater their wealth and spending power would be. He was sure that once he raised the level of his inn, his services would be upgraded enough to even be effective for immortals, or stronger cultivators. In that case, it would become extremely tedious to quote the high prices in MP. There was just one thing he was curious about. Based on what he experienced, once a guest made any payment using any single item worth 1 metric ton or more, the item would be retained instead of giving Lex the equivalent MP or MT. If that was actually the case, Lex would end up suffering a loss for while he was getting very valuable things, his system needed MP not items. It would get in the way of the system operating properly once too much MT was replaced by items instead. But he didn't know enough for now to guess. Perhaps once he reached a level where such transactions were common, he would unlock something to aid him with this problem. Once he was done with the token shop, Lex looked at the other rewards he got, the first of which was the commemorative fridge magnet. Even Mary, who had been hovering around his head while he checked the system, leaned in to take a look. To call the magnet impressive would be to lie. Lex could swear that if he didn't know better, if he turned it around, he would see a "Made in China" written on it. Not that he checked the back, just in case, no, he was just inspecting the magnet. The problem wasn't that the magnet was low quality. No, it was smooth to touch with considerable weight and impressive durability, considering that it remained completely unharmed in his hands even though Lex could not control his strength. The problem was that it was a miniature figure of Lex striking a rather corny pose. As a resident of New York, Lex's mind kept jumping to the image of the Lady Liberty magnets that were sold to tourists all over the city. It was just too. Lex sighed and put it away. The magnet literally had no other utility. It was as if the system were making fun of him. The next reward was the guest registry, a reward for having the inn get recognized by the Hanali. It better be good. Guest registry. A book that can be signed by all guests who enter the inn. The registry automatically evaluates all the achievements the guests have accomplished in their lives so far and then displays the guests' names ranked according to their most momentous achievements. Actual achievements are not listed. The top 1,000 guests can use the guest registry as a spatial anchor. The top 100 guests can use it as a spiritual anchor. The top 10 guests can use it as a destiny anchor. Any guest who can retain the top spot can use the registry as a sole anchor for the same duration that they held the top position. It took a while for Lex to understand the registry's utility, and even then, he didn't understand it completely. More or less, it was a way to rank the most impressive, or rather impactful, guests who had visited the inn. Lex could not be sure how the book would rank achievements, but he knew that the term was too vague. A person scrounging up ingredients and cooking a meal could be considered an achievement based on his wealth or circumstances, while being elected president of a country was also an achievement. Clearly, one of those was more impressive than the other, but the point was evident. Achievements was too vague a term. Heck, even genocidal maniacs could consider their work as achievements. Moreover, the inn did not provide any detail or clarity on what the purpose of these anchors were. Lex could venture a few guesses, but there was a more practical way of finding out. Lex summoned the registry and a large, hardback book with beautiful gold illustrations on it appeared in front of Lex. It was thick, predictably, and the pages produced a satisfying and smooth creasing sound as Lex looked through them. Only taking a brief moment to appreciate the book, Lex quickly turned to the matter at hand and signed his name, Lex Williams. For a moment, nothing happened. He almost thought that the book wouldn't work on him for some reason, but then the name disappeared, and the book automatically flipped to a new page where Lex's name was written in the most beautiful calligraphy he had ever seen. In front of his name was a bold one. The moment Lex laid his eyes on the name, he felt a strange connection develop with the book, and then another, followed by two more. Since currently he was the top name, he qualified for all four of the anchors the book allowed. Yet even as he felt the anchors form, he did not completely understand what all of them did. The spatial anchor was evident. Lex developed a strange sense for the location of the book, as if he could find it even with his eyes closed. Based on that, he suspected that whoever had that anchor would always be able to find the book, even if they were not in the realm. Lex knew that the system would not allow for such a blatant security flaw, so he suspected that instead of letting those with the anchors locate the minor realm where the inn was hidden, it would allow them to travel directly to the inn without the use of a golden key. The spiritual anchor was strange. When Lex closed his eyes, he could envision the book, and that provided him with some sort of comfort. Yet that seemed to be it. He was sure there was more to it, but it would be up to him to figure out the details. The destiny anchor, forget it. Lex couldn't feel anything. He had long known that matters relating to destiny were far outside his purview for the moment. The soul anchor, however, was extremely remarkable. So much so that Lex was tempted to never unveil the book at all, and keep its benefits to himself. Chapter 440 Anchors. Lex gulped as he eyed the book with intense greed. This was not the kind of greed that one could shrug off, and Lex had felt it only once before when he encountered the bangle of Narn, a bangle which had an entire galaxy within, with all of its resources available to any who wore it. Back then, accepting the bangle would have put Lex at great risk, which caused him to hesitate in accepting it. Yet now, there weren't any risks. But the feeling did not last long, for the system, quite unprompted, provided him with a clear explanation of how the last anchor worked. Basically, anyone who had a soul anchor in this book could find a way to continue living, even if someone murdered their body. It was basically the same method that Harry used to survive his attack. Although his body had been destroyed beyond the point where it could allow him to live, causing his soul to scatter, bits of his soul were retained in his equipment. Using those bits, Harry had been allowed to live on, until Lex could provide him with medicine to heal and regrow his soul properly. The only difference was, with the anchor, even if the body was completely destroyed, it would allow the person to fully retain their consciousness for as long as the anchor lasted. He wasn't sure what could be done in that situation to keep oneself from dying, but it was better than nothing. It could give them time to come up with a plan, or allow them to share their last wishes or information about how they died. Honestly, no matter how many guests it would attract, Lex saw no reason why he would put this book in public instead of using it for himself. Well, that is until he saw the latest notification. New notification: in the event of the innkeeper's death, the inn and all its services will cease to work, including the guest registry. The guest registry will, therefore, be unable to revive the innkeeper. A bucket of cold water doused all of Lex's heated emotions, but it was to be expected. From day one, the system had done its best to make sure it would not help Lex directly as much as possible. While it was less successful now in doing that due to the variety of services the inn offered, it still tried to do the same. Lex was so disappointed, in fact, that he directly teleported the book to the Midnight Manor and told Mary to have it put out in front. He did not even open up a special place for it, nor did he advertise its effects. He knew he should do that as it would only benefit him, but he was slightly bitter. Once the depression of having a get-out-of-death-free card taken away from him dwindled, Lex would properly do something about the registry. Until then, he had other things to do. The next reward was the wish. The system was automatically absorbing all divinity that belonged to the so-called butter knife god and using it to power the wish. Once it reached 100%, Lex could literally make a wish and it would come true. He did not know what limitations the wish had, but that was impressive no matter what. He could already think of a few different things he would want to wish for. Well, more than a few. It was a good thing he had plenty of time to narrow down what to use it for. Now that he was finally done reading the notifications and rewards, it was time to see if he could use any of them. The guest registry was automatically excluded, and the magnet had been teleported to the fridge in his apartment, despite his wish to bury it somewhere. The lockdown token was of no use to Lex at the moment, so that only left the other 2 tokens behind. Lex already knew what he was going to do with the 0.5-star increase token. He was going to do a full event based around it, so that only left the service upgrade token. He could potentially leave it alone until he encountered a situation where he really needed it, but to do that, he would first have to evaluate whether or not he could massively benefit from it right now. The token could upgrade any service, which had been provided directly by the system, and there were quite a few of them. If Lex were to list them. The list was long, but it included basic and advanced accommodations, various rooms, etc., beyond the grave, Boulder Shrine, Chamber of Secrets, the fishing well, the greenhouse, the guest registry, the guild room, the hot tub room, the inheritance lounge, the meditation room, the midnight news building, the murder ground, the mystery trial, the ORR, organic reconstruction room, the pro bono wing, the recovery pod, the recovery room, the rumor room, the training room and the wine cellar, among others. If the security room counted as a service, Lex would have picked it in a heartbeat, but like many other things it counted only as a feature of the inn, not a service, so it was not upgradable. That left him with a few various options. Meditation room was a no-brainer, for it would help in cultivation. One of the recovery services would also be a good upgrade option, as that was always a popular feature of the inn. Boulder Shrine was a good option for Lex, could directly benefit if the divine essence improved. To be honest, quite a few of the services had great possibilities with an upgrade. But at the same time, there was one specific one which could not receive an upgrade normally, the mystery trial. Although Lex himself never got around to trying it out, the mystery trial was one of the most popular attractions at the inn. But regardless of how popular it was, Lex could not create multiple, nor could he upgrade it as it came as a reward from the system. Technically, there were a few other services that could not be upgraded through normal means, such as Beyond the Grave, which would benefit from this token immensely. Yet for some reason, Lex felt greatly attracted to the idea of upgrading the mystery trial. It was a gamble, but his instincts had not led him astray so far. Without giving himself the opportunity to come to his senses, Lex used the token on the trial.